Hey guys, tonight we're diving into the story of a king who decided that the muddy banks of a Thracian lake were the perfect spot for a brand new capital, rivaling Athens, even if you might not survive the first day of his ambition. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, drop a comment below telling me your city and what time it is there right now. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Tracing Seuthes III's vision. The story begins not in grand halls, but on a marshy floodplain where most advisors would have said, "Buddy, pick a drier spot." Born into the powerful Odrysian dynasty around the late 4th century BCE, Seuthes III found himself juggling Thracian tribal politics, Greek mercenary demands, and Macedonian intrigues all at once. Mainstream historians agree that the Odrysians were the dominant Thracian power for 2 centuries, stretching from the Aegean littoral to the foothills of the Balkans. Yet rather than settle for a subdued hilltop settlement like many of his predecessors, Seuthes turned his gaze to the depths of what would become Lake Yolfa, choosing an unconventional nook for an empire's pulse. Surveying the muddy shoreline on an early spring morning, you'd catch sight of rough-hewn planks, ox carts, and hammers ringing as foremen shouted orders over the clang of iron. Contrary to popular belief, Thracian kings weren't just beer-swilling barbarians. They studied Hellenic engineering closely. In dusty scrolls recovered centuries later, one obscure note mentions that the Odrysian court even sent envoys to Rhodes to commission marble quarries. Yet nobody really expected a Thracian ruler to replicate those gleaming colonnades halfway across the peninsula. Historians are still debating this question. Building a city from scratch takes more than enthusiasm. Early experiments with rammed earth walls collapsed under seasonal floods, so Seuthes authorized the import of lime mortar and stone from distant quarries, an expensive gamble that immediately raised eyebrows among his council. Workers stamped clay into wooden molds for drainage channels, a design clearly inspired by Greek cisterns back in Pella. But here's the kicker. Thracian soil is notoriously unpredictable, moving as if it had a mind of its own. Local folklore even whispered that ancient spirits in the mudway resisted any effort to tame them. Visualizing Seuthopolis in its infancy, the city plan emerges like a labyrinth of terraces and ramps hewn into clay. Main avenues were wide enough for cavalry maneuvers, reflecting Thracian love for mounted warfare, while side lanes remained narrow, shadowy corridors where market stalls would later line up. Records from a later Byzantine chronicler, yes, you read that right, mention a giant flat rock inscribed with Seuthes' name and titles, placed at the city's heart as both a declaration and a dare. Prove your worth or fall. That inscribed stone, now lost beneath silt, lends an almost cinematic aura to the scene. Amidst this construction frenzy, a quirky footnote survives. Thracian laborers often left small clay tokens of horses under the foundations as good luck charms. Nobody knows whether those charms worked, but local superstitions about jar-shaped omens persisted long after the city fell silent. Meanwhile, advisors continued debating the city's real purpose. Was it meant as a thriving administrative hub, or principally as a sanctuary to honor Thracian deities through lavish temples? Historians are still debating this question. Following the clamor of construction, imagine hundreds of workers sweating under a bronze sun, chiseling blocks, hauling water from nearby springs, and chanting offset rhythms to keep time. The soundscape wasn't just labor chants in Thracian, shouts in Koine Greek, and periodic orders in Old Persian mingled, hinting at the multicultural court Seuthes envisioned. Trade envoys from Pontus and Byzantium arrived with gift horses and fine textiles, a reminder that Thrace was more interconnected than Victorian painters ever credited. Beyond the worksite, the king's own entourage inspected progress daily. Sources suggest that Seuthes rode a white stallion, quite the showman, often bursting into city squares with a grin and a sarcastic quip about someone's missing spear. Rumor has it he once challenged Macedonian engineers to a drinking contest, deliberately sloshing wine over their carefully drawn blueprints when he won. Whether that's true remains unclear, but it illustrates his brash style. Part strategic genius, part court jester. Overseeing the grander vision, temple platforms rose on higher terraces. dedicated to both native Thracian gods like Zalmoxis and imported deities like Artemis, and perhaps even the enigmatic Bendis. These sanctuaries showcased an architectural hybrid: Doric columns carved with griffin motifs, pediments painted in deep crimson, and inner sanctums scented with pine resin. Worshippers stood on stone benches carved into the hill, creating a natural amphitheater for ritual dances. That layout would later influence Hellenistic amphitheaters, but predicting that would be anachronistic bragging. Political symbolism went beyond spectator rituals. A massive stone foundation, evidence still visible beneath murky waters, aligned precisely with sunrise on the summer solstice. This alignment likely commemorated seasonal rebirth, a widespread motif across Thracian cultures. One archaeological note mentions painted star patterns on temple ceilings, some of the oldest celestial depictions north of Greece. It's one of those delightful quirks that remind us Thracians weren't merely followers. They contributed original ideas to the Hellenic world. Keeping rival noble families in check required more than steel. Seuthes gifted strategic marriage alliances and lavish feast invitations, using diplomacy as deftly as any sword. His own queen's lineage traced back to a Persian satrap, cementing ties eastward. Yet despite these bonds, whispers of resentment flickered like torchlight among the Odrysian elite. A surviving fragment of a throne inscription praises Seuthes IV, uniting the hills and plains under one proud banner. But scholars still puzzle over what exactly that unity entailed: cultural syncretism, political centralization, or something more mystical. On quiet nights, the king strolled to a vantage point overlooking the lake's inlet, reflecting on his legacy. Marble quarries and workshops glowed under torchlight, while distant hooves echoed along earthen ramparts. Nobody could deny the audacity of planting a city so boldly at nature's whim. Yet even Seuthes knew that the lake was capricious. Its waters rose unpredictably, and some nights the shore swelled ominously close to the foundations. Local soothsayers insisted the lake had its own will, a reminder that empires rest on fragile pacts with their environment. Modern exploration reveals that Seuthopolis's inner citadel formed a distinct island at high water levels, surrounded by concentric terraces, a fortress within a city. That defensive layout might explain why some believe it was a war citadel first, civic center second. Others argue the temples took precedence, given their elaborate reliefs of Thracian myths. Historians are still debating this question. Amid these earthly machinations, an offbeat anecdote lingers. Seuthes supposedly commissioned a parade float shaped like a giant boar, complete with bronze tusks and smoke vents. Whether this spectacle ever appeared at a festival or was abandoned in sketches is unclear, but the idea of a molten-metal boar rumbling through streets has that perfect blend of whimsy and menace you'd expect from a king with showmanship on his mind. By the time the sun set on that first golden season, the city's basic grid lay in place, a testament to ambition married with hard reality. Soldiers drilled on parade grounds, merchants marked out trade routes east and west, and farmers in nearby fields wondered if their harvests would ever reach these marble gates. Meanwhile, Seuthes rested in his provisional palace, a timber structure awaiting stone replacement, already plotting his next move. A network of roads linking Seuthopolis to Thrace's farthest borders. Unless you prize dusty tomes and half-burned scrolls, it's easy to forget how radical this experiment was. Building a new capital in the 4th century BCE involved more than blueprints. It demanded a magnetic leader who could harness the raw energy of tribes, Greeks, and Persians alike. Seuthes managed that rare feat, if only for a few fleeting decades, before fate and water conspired against him. But tonight, you've witnessed that spark, an empire's heartbeat echoing across a swampy shore, daring the world to watch. Mist hangs low over the broad expanse of marshland, gold from the rising sun struggling to penetrate the damp veil. Here, on this soggy plain, the promise of a Thracian capital unfolds in an unlikely cradle of clay and water. As dawn's light warms the reeds, you feel the ground tremble underfoot, a subtle reminder that this foundation refuses to obey without coaxing. Seuthes III, in his audacious vision, chose these very banks, where flooding was as certain as sunrise, to prove that ingenuity can bend even stubborn earth to his will. Following the low roar of hammers, You wade across shallow pools toward a row of wooden molds half submerged in sludge. Inside each frame, laborers pack alternating layers of wet clay and limestone fragments, tapping the earth with heavy mallets until layers fuse into a composite wall. Known elsewhere as opus criticium among Hellenic builders, this rammed earth technique marries local materials with Greek mortar knowledge, creating walls surprisingly flexible under shifting soils. Hidden beneath the surface, a subtle network of drainage channels snakes its way between terraces, designed to whisk away seasonal deluge into cisterns crafted from fired brick. Historians are still debating which Greek city-state first shared these methods with Thrace, a mystery that adds an enticing layer of scholarly intrigue. River stones harvested from the Strymon's tributaries lie piled nearby, each cobble smoothed by centuries of water before becoming anchor stones for Seuthopolis's lower courses. As you kneel to inspect the stones, the faint imprint of clay horse figurines catches your eye, small talismans pressed into wet mortar by superstitious laborers, intended to beckon favor from earth spirits. This unusual custom appears nowhere in written Thracian texts yet persists in oral folklore, hinting at the unseen interplay between faith and construction. Whether these tokens truly protected the walls or were mere amusements remains one of archaeology's quirkiest footnotes. A group of engineers, clad in linen tunics dusted with lime, debates the perfect gradient for the primary drainage conduit. Wooden plumb lines dangle from their hands, testing each channel's incline to within a fraction of a degree. Nearby, Thracian workers hum chants in their native tongue, an unscripted rhythm that seems to synchronize with the pounding of mallets. Local beliefs hold that rushing water carries the voices of river gods, and any misaligned channel risks incurring their wrath. Occasionally, a laborer pauses to toss a pinch of grain into the channel as an offering, a gesture that slows work but infuses the site with ritual purpose. Surveying the half-finished trenches, overseers test each wall segment with hollow taps from wooden mallets. A dull thud signals a soft spot where earth must be retamped. A clear ring implies solid fusion. Every hollow echo demands immediate excavation, repacking of clay, and fresh mortar application. As midday approaches, shallow pools gleam under the high sun, reflecting a panorama of scaffolds, merchants' tents, and the occasional bronze flask carried by water carriers. A distant flute trill pierces the din, perhaps a musician accompanying midday prayers to Zalmoxis, the Thracian sky god. At the water's edge, Seuthes' military engineers oversee the construction of temporary wells and cisterns, ensuring clean water reaches the workforce. Stone-lined shafts descend into gravel beds, filtering groundwater before it rises through ceramic pipes. Though Greek plumb bobs and surveying gear feature prominently, local artisans adapt the tools with carved wooden handles and Thracian script inscriptions. This hybridization of technology and culture exemplifies the broader ambition. A city that blends Hellenic sophistication with native breadth. High above, the first terrace walls take shape, revealing the future outline of the central agora. Massive stone slabs imported from the Halkidiki Peninsula lie stacked in neat rows, awaiting final placement. The plaza floor will be paved in alternating bands of dark Thracian limestone and white marble, a bold pattern meant to dazzle visitors arriving by river. Subterranean vaults beneath the plaza will house grain stores and oil reserves, evidence that Seuthes planned not just a ceremonial hub, but a fully functioning metropolis capable of withstanding sieges. Historians debate whether these vaults were primarily for military stockpiles or civic granaries, a question that colors interpretations of the city's intended use. A sudden clatter draws your attention to a procession of high-born nobles, adorned in embroidered cloaks dyed with madder root. They settle onto raised platforms overlooking the trenches, sipping sour wines spiced with garlic and cumin. Their voices rise in a low argument. Some praise the rammed earth walls as proof of Seuthes' genius. Others deride the entire endeavor as an expensive folly compared to simple hilltop fortresses. While the criticisms sting, the king's engineers counter with reports of soil tests and flood simulations. Even today, scholars revisit these debates, questioning whether the floodplain site was chosen for ritual symbolism or strategic waterways access. Passing beneath a temporary wooden archway inscribed with Seuthes' titles, you marvel at the king's penchant for theater. Rumor has it that he staged mock inspections, ordering hidden musicians to play drums that reverberated through the earthen walls, making the city appear alive and prosperous to distant ambassadors. Whether such spectacles truly took place remains unverified, a tantalizing anecdote scholars cite with caution. As afternoon wanes, sunlight slants across the terraces, casting long shadows of cranes and pulleys onto drying earth. Each crane, rigged with woven leather ropes, hoists smaller stone blocks into place, while teams below guide them with leather straps. Observing the choreography, it's clear that the workforce operates as a single organism. Workers, engineers, priests, and guards all contributing to a unified purpose. Yet beneath this harmony simmers the tension of unpaid laborers demanding higher rations and honored tokens. Another layer of complexity in the human mosaic that built Seuthopolis. Crossing a newly laid stone causeway, you arrive at a circular platform destined to host the temple of Bendis, goddess of the moon and hunting. Here, limestone blocks bear faint chisel marks side by side with Thracian hammer impressions, evidence of a cooperative spirit between Greek masons and local craftsmen. Pine resin torches, arranged in carved stone holders, already scent the air, hinting at the rituals to come once walls rise higher. Small holes in the platform floor suggest that incense burners will punctuate nightly ceremonies, a practice shared by both Thracian and Greek worshippers. Gathering stone fragments from nearby spoil heaps, you notice intricate carvings, griffin heads, rosettes, and stylized maize stalks. Some motifs echo those found on Scythian gold pectorals. Others resemble Ionian volutes, underscoring Seuthes' aim to fuse far-reaching artistic traditions. Among the rubble, a chipped fragment depicts a pair of dancers, Thracian tribeswomen, perhaps, locked in arm intertwining. This fragment offers a rare glimpse into local folk dance, otherwise lost to time. Such discoveries remind us that architecture tells only part of the story. Art preserves the heartbeat of daily life. As the sun dips toward the western hills, the workers pause for a communal meal in long trenches turned temporary dining halls. Jars of olives, flatbreads, barley porridge, and goat cheese circulate among men who exchange jokes in 3 languages. One uproarious quip claims that if the walls fail, Seuthes will build on mountaintops next season. An ironic jab at the whole project. Laughter fills the air, even as they snap photos. Well, not photos, but small charcoal sketches of the half-built walls, capturing a moment of shared hardship and camaraderie. Night approaches with a chill breeze rolling off the lake. Torches ignite along the scaffold planks, revealing a dreamscape of incomplete terraces softened by flickering light. Here, priests perform a brief rite, pouring wine into carved basins and whispering prayers to the river's spirit. Few workers watch, respecting the ritual but eager to resume work at first light. The priests toss flower petals onto the water's surface, invoking both protection and purification, an overlay of spiritual engineering to complement the physical structures. Under the rising moon, Seuthes himself walks the causeway, flanked by bodyguards holding lanterns. His eyes, reflecting torchlight, flick over walls, channels, and terraces as if reading an invisible blueprint. Though praise follows his every stride, a shadow crosses his face when he senses the lake's quiet unrest. Water lapping at the foundations reminds him that his city's fate resides as much in nature's hands as in his own. Local soothsayers claim the lake dreams of reclaiming what was once lost, a chilling notion for a king who prided himself on defying odds. By dawn of the next day, the floodplain stands transformed. Trenches backfilled, terraces rising like giant steps carved into clay, and drainage channels humming with trickling water. The first stretch of paved road, marked by alternating stones of white marble and gray limestone, leads visitors from the riverbank. Morning light filters through drifting incense smoke as you step beneath towering columns carved from gleaming white marble. Each shaft, polished smooth and crowned with a Doric capital, seems to hold up the sky itself, a promise that Seuthes III did not settle for modest shrines but aimed to match the grandeur of mainland Greece. These colonnades are not mere decoration. They form a covered ambulatory around the great temple, where citizens and pilgrims alike can pace in slow reverence. Beneath your sandals, the marble floor is laid in alternating bands of dark Thracian limestone and bright Aegean marble. This bold geometric pattern dazzles the eye and speaks to Seuthes' ambition to create a visual bridge between Thracian tradition and Hellenic sophistication. Artisans imported the marble from quarries near Paros, enduring months of sea travel to reach the Black Sea shore. Ship manifests etched on lead tablets, rare surviving administrative records, list shipments of blocks weighing up to a ton each. Despite the logistical nightmare, these imports transformed a marshy frontier into a temple complex worthy of Olympus. Historians are still debating how Seuthes secured such Greek support without angering powerful city-states like Athens or Sparta. The central focus is the Temple of Bendis, the Thracian moon goddess whose cult had grown popular among both locals and Greek colonists. Inside its cella, you glimpse a carved wooden statue draped in silver robes. Worshippers whispered that her eyes were inlaid with obsidian, reflecting moonlight in eerie, living sheen. Pilgrims would enter through a vestibule lined with reliefs. Hunting scenes where Bendis pursues stag and boar, traced with red and blue pigments now faded, but detected in microscopic pigment analysis. Archaeologists discovered tiny flecks of Egyptian blue, a pigment prized by pharaohs, mixed in the plaster of Paris coating the walls. This exotic trace reveals a trade network reaching as far south as Alexandria. Moving along the colonnade, you pass the smaller shrine dedicated to Zalmoxis, the Thracian sky and underworld god. Its facade is modest compared to Bendis's temple, but bears intricate friezes of winged horses. Legend says that Seuthes built the shrine after surviving a near-fatal illness, dedicating it in gratitude. Inside, a stone basin collects rainwater from the roof, a ritual font for purification ceremonies. Some scholars argue the basin's shape mimics a lunar crescent, suggesting cross-cultural symbolism. Others insist it's simply practical. Historians are still debating this question. Between temples, pedestals once held bronze votive offerings, small figurines of horses, warriors, and mythic beasts. A peculiar find was a tiny bronze chariot with wheels that actually spin, evidently crafted by a Thracian tinkerer who blended Greek mechanical knowledge with local metalworking traditions. This curious artifact may have served as a toy, a votive symbol of safe travels, or even a demonstration piece for visiting dignitaries. Whatever its purpose, the craftsmanship rivals that of Etruscan workshops in Italy. Along the eastern colonnade stands an open-air altar carved from a single block of limestone. Its surface is pockmarked with shallow bowls, each once filled with offerings, wine, grains, and, according to some stubborn legends, a drop of wine mixed with animal blood. Yet the official records insist rituals were bloodless, favoring botanical libations and honey cakes. This divergence between legend and inscription fuels ongoing debate. Did Thracian rites incorporate bloodletting, as some Roman historians claimed? Or did the Odrysians reform their practices under Hellenic influence? Scholars are still debating this question. At midday, sunlight slants through the column shafts, casting long stripes across the temple floor. Priests in linen robes lead chanting processions, their voices echoing between pillars in haunting harmony. On certain feast days, dancers circle the altar in trance-like steps, wearing wreaths of oak and laurel. Observers noted these rituals blended Thracian fertility ceremonies with Greek theatrical masking, a cultural fusion that inspired later Hellenistic mystery cults. A rare vase painting discovered near Seuthopolis depicts masked figures brandishing torches, perhaps an echo of these enchanting nocturnal rites. To your right, a pair of Ionic porticos shelters a courtyard used for philosophical debates and civic gatherings. Marble benches line the walls, carved with inscriptions praising Seuthes' vision of unity between Thracian clans. Here, itinerant Greek rhetoricians lectured on Homer and Stoic ethics, while local nobles added Thracian proverbs and glosses. The result was a living tapestry of cross-cultural learning, an early form of syncretic academy. Text fragments mention a house of speeches, but its exact location remains unknown, swallowed by silt or repurposed for later constructions. Behind the main temples lie smaller chapels dedicated to healing gods, Asclepius and a lesser-known local deity named Olorus. Pilgrims seeking cures would carve prayers onto limestone tablets, then leave them in niches carved into the walls. Remarkably, some surviving tablets bear inscriptions in three scripts: Greek, Thracian hieroglyphics, and even Old Persian cuneiform, evidence of the city's reach and the diverse backgrounds of its devotees. One tablet offers thanks in the name of Artaxerxes, suggesting Persian envoys possibly sought divine favor here before journeying inland. Turning toward the southern wing, you find a peristyle garden, an enclosed marble courtyard planted with olive trees, pomegranate bushes, and fragrant herbs. A marble fountain at its center feeds a shallow pool, where water lilies bloom in summer. This garden provided shade and solace for weary temple's visitors, and perhaps inspired later Roman horti designs. Archaeobotanical studies of pollen samples confirm the presence of imported Mediterranean olive cultivars, an agricultural import as radical as the columns themselves. Walking the perimeter, you pass a row of arched niches where statues once stood. Although most statues were lost, occasional fragments, a foot here, a hand there, hint at their former glory. A fragmentary head of a young warrior, carved with unusually realistic details, suggests Thracian sculptors may have experimented with early Hellenistic portraiture. Was this head intended to depict a local hero, a Greek ally, or Seuthes himself? The broken inscription offers only the letters sigma epsilon upsilon theta, leaving its identity tantalizingly ambiguous. As dusk approaches, torchlight flickers against the marble, revealing minute details. Carved rosettes in the capitals, vine and grape reliefs beneath eaves, and the faint red traces of painted decorations. Once, these temples blazed with color. Modern eyes see only pale stone, but microscopic pigment remnants reveal walls adorned in vivid reds, blues, and gold. The discovery of such pigments beneath silt has challenged previous assumptions that Greek temples were pure white, another topic scholars are still debating. In the waning light, you climb the broad steps leading to the highest terrace. From this vantage, the temple complex stands like a crown upon the floodplain, its marble columns glinting against the coming night. The lake beyond reflects torchlight, and you imagine processions winding from the riverbank up these steps in devotional grandeur. In those moments, Seuthopolis must have felt like the world's center, a melding of Thracian spirit and Greek grandeur, poised between earth and sky. Behind you, the wind carries the soft toll of a bronze bell, summoning worshippers to evening rites. Priests emerge, scattering incense and chanting invocations to moon and earth. As the stars awaken overhead, the colonnades become cathedral-like aisles, the white marble pillars turning silver in the lunar glow. For a city built on mud, this luminous tableau must have seemed miraculous, a testament to human artistry transcending elemental chaos. You leave the temple precinct with the echo of chanting in your ears and the resilience of marble under your fingertips, aware that these colonnades and temples captured Seuthes' boldest ambitions. They fused imported materials, local artistry, and spiritual symbolism into a built environment unmatched in Thrace. Whether these sanctuaries primarily served civic festivals, cultic functions, or political theater remains contested among experts. Yet their sheer scale and elegance speak for themselves, an enduring chapter in the legacy of a Thracian king who dared to build in stone on the very edge of the wild. Dawn's first light seeps through narrow alleys, illuminating dew on flagstones as the city stirs. You hear the low rumble of drums from the Temple of Bendis, followed by a lone horn blast that echoes across terraces. The day begins not with fanfare but with the simple rhythms of survival and ceremony intertwined. A thin mist clings to the riverbanks, and the scent of damp earth mingles with wood smoke rising from hearths. You rise from straw mattress pallets laid on woven mats inside your humble stone and timber lodging. The walls, still warm from last night's brazier, rattle softly when wind gusts through shuttered windows. Outside, a neighbor strikes flint to kindle a small fire in a clay oven. Soon you'll smell freshly baked barley flatbreads scented with wild thyme. Thracian cooks prized local herbs for flavor, a fact that points to robust regional agriculture under the Odrysian kingdom's auspices. Stepping into the street, you wend your way past water carriers balancing amphorae on yokes. They pause at communal fountains fed by underground cisterns, dipping copper ladles to fill ceramic jugs. Splashing sounds and greetings in Thracian dialect greet early risers before Greek and Persian phrases join the chorus, reflecting the city's multicultural pulse. The first merchants set out low wooden tables piled with black olives cured in sea salt. Nearby, sacks of oats, goat cheese logs, and dried figs entice passers-by. You haggle over a handful of figs, trading a small bronze coin inlaid with Seuthes III's bust. Odrysian minting under his reign marked the kingdom's economic independence. Mainstream historians note that Seuthopolis struck its own silver and bronze coinage around 325 BCE, a bold statement of sovereignty in Thrace. A few stalls down, fishmongers display salted anchovies and garum, a fermented fish sauce imported from Greek enclaves. A peculiar container of spiced mare's milk, known locally as kumis, catches your eye. Thracian warriors valued it for its supposed tonic properties, though most city folk find the tangy brew an acquired taste. This odd libation underlines the region's pastoral traditions surviving alongside new urban trends. Minting workshops hum with activity. Die cutters engrave copper blanks with Seuthes' profile, while apprentices strike coins on iron anvils. Thracian coin iconography often featured horse motifs, a nod to cavalry strength, and exotic griffins borrowed from Greek artistry. Scholars are still debating whether these griffins symbolized protective guardians or simply decorative flourishes celebrating Hellenic influence. By mid-morning, scribes gather at shaded tables carved into colonnade niches. They copy administrative records on papyrus scrolls using reed pens dipped in iron gall ink. Some even experiment with local parchment, tanning goat skins in tannin-rich barks. The classification of the Thracian language, whether it stemmed from the same Indo-European branch as Greek or represented a separate linguistic family, remains unresolved. Historians are still debating this question. Along the riverbank, potters will out fresh batches of amphory stamped with maker's marks. These jars, destined for wine, olive oil, or fermented mare's milk, reflect local craftsmanship. A curious motif, a dancing figure holding twin serpents, appears on some vessels, possibly referencing chthonic protective deities. Few scholars have examined this motif, making it a delightful footnote in ceramic studies. The clang of metal signals activity at the northern gate, where the city militia assembles. Cavalry troopers adjust leather straps on their horse tack and oil their bronze helmets until they gleam. Infantrymen heft long spears and practice shield formations on the parade ground. Military readiness intertwines with civic pride here. Seuthes insisted that every able-bodied man train weekly, a policy that fostered unity but left little time for idle luxury. In nearby workshops, blacksmiths forge plowshares and javelins alike, heating iron in charcoal-fired furnaces. Sparks fly as hammer meets anvil, and the smell of burning coal lingers in the air. A veteran smith, missing a finger from an old battlefield wound, jokes that forging plowshares tastes as bitter as forging spears. An ironic twist on the soldier-farmer duality. Midday rituals commence at the temple of Zalmoxis. Priests pour botanical libations, wine mixed with honey and crushed grains, into carved stone basins. Official edicts insisted on bloodless offerings, though some Roman chroniclers claimed ancient Thracians once spilled animal blood to honor chthonic gods. The truth remains murky, fueling heated academic debate. Scholars are still debating this question. Children scamper through side streets, carrying clay horse tokens like the ones pressed into foundations decades earlier. They race tiny chariots carved from driftwood, their laughter echoing over the rush of water from nearby channels. Education begins early here. Youngsters learn riding in simple leather saddles before memorizing tribal proverbs in Thracian and lessons in basic arithmetic, essential skills for future scribes and traders. A surprising luxury emerges at the communal bathhouse. Heated benches and hollow floors warmed by a rudimentary hypocaust system. Some insist this heating method was borrowed from neighboring Greek colonies. Others argue Thracian engineers developed their own variant. Historians are still debating this question. Bathers soak in lead-lined tubs filled with steaming water infused with pine resin, benefiting both hygiene and communal gossip. In the shaded peristyle of the central agora, philosophers from Athens and local Thracian thinkers engage in spirited debates. Topics range from the nature of virtue to the latest report from Macedon. Stoic ethics mingle with Thracian hero cults, yielding lively exchanges. You linger, sipping lightly spiced wine as speakers quote Homer, then pivot to local legends of Orpheus and gods who walked among tribes. Nearby, scribes meticulously copy parchment codices under oil lamps, preserving laws, poetry, and treaties with Byzantium. Papyrus imports prove expensive, so goat parchment often substitutes. Scrap bits pasted together form bulky, patchwork scrolls. The scarcity of writing materials makes each page precious, and scribes charge high fees. A mid-afternoon festival erupts near the southern gate, where townsfolk race donkeys adorned in colorful tassels. Betting benches cluster alongside, and hearty laughter rises as some riders wipe straw from their faces after unexpected falls. These races, a quirky local tradition, may derive from Thracian equestrian games. Ancient records mention similar contests held in open-air arenas. In weaving quarters, women dye wool and linen using madder root, weldwood, and yes, fermented urine from spent tanners, a pungent but effective mordant. Stripes of crimson, ochre, and indigo decorate looms as children watch wide-eyed. The resultant textiles, woven into tunics and cloaks, are prized trade goods, exported through Thrace's river networks. By late afternoon, traders from Pontus and Byzantium arrive in slender riverboats, unloading silk ribbons, silver jewelry, and amphorae of imported wine. Negotiations unfold in rapid Greek, with Thracian traders countering in measured tones. Rumors drift of distant markets as far as Byzantium and even the edge of Scythia, evidence of Seuthopolis's commercial reach. As shadows lengthen, the call to evening prayers drifts from temple courtyards. You follow the sound to a small tavern where lamb stew simmers in a clay pot. Patrons recline on low benches, sipping spiced wine in dim lamplight. A traveling minstrel strums a pear-shaped lute, singing of heroes and storms, an auditory tapestry that ties everyday life to epic memory. Outside, torches line the city walls, and sentries patrol with measured steps. Horse hooves clatter on stone causeways as cavalry scouts perform evening circuits. The air cools, and the promise of rest beckons. Yet whispers of lake spirits drifting beneath the surface keep the city on edge. Finally, lantern-lit lanterns guide you back to your lodging. You settle onto your mat as distant chanting lingers from the Temple of Bendis. Streets quiet except for the lull of water and the soft murmur of guards. In these nightly hours, Seuthopolis transforms from bustling hub to a place of introspection. A city alive both in waking bustle and whispered dreams. At the fringes of Seuthopolis, a network of shrines lies hidden among terraced slopes, each dedicated to ancient powers that shaped everyday life. You slip through vine-draped entrances carved into limestone outcrops, the air cool and heavy with the scent of pine resin and crushed herbs. Flickering oil lamps illuminate carved reliefs depicting half-human, half-animal figures. Strange hybrids that blur boundaries between this world and the next. A low chant hums from deeper within. Priests in linen robes, their heads shaven in ritual purity, move silently around stone altars, carrying shallow bronze bowls filled with honey cakes and botanical infusions. These offerings honor Zalmoxis, the Thracian sky god and redeemer, whose worship Herodotus records as central to Thracian belief. Initiation rites that promised a form of immortality through union with the divine. According to surviving Orphic fragments, aspirants entered dark chambers to fast and meditate, awaiting a mystical rebirth, signaled by a sudden breeze or whispered voice. Passing a slender corridor lined with niches, you notice small clay tokens, miniature plowshares, horses, even leaf shapes, tucked into crevices. These obscure talismans, discovered by archaeologists in 2018, appear nowhere else in the ancient world and may reflect a uniquely Thracian blend of agrarian and martial symbolism. Whether they functioned as protective charms for the city's fertility or as initiatory badges for secret societies remains one of archaeology's most intriguing puzzles. The main ritual chamber unfolds before you. A circular space roofed by overlapping stone slabs, supported by columns carved to resemble entwined oak branches. At its center, an altar of polished limestone bears concentric grooves for libations, honey, wine, and possibly fermented mare's milk. Though literary sources emphasize bloodless offerings, scholars are still debating whether animal sacrifice played any part in early Thracian ceremonies. Inscriptions on nearby stelae, however, forbid spilled blood, suggesting an official move toward nonviolent rites under Seuthes' patronage. Above the altar, a small opening in the roof admits moonlight, falling on a bas-relief of Bendis, the moon goddess whose cult blended Thracian and Greek elements. Pilgrims positioned themselves under this shaft of light during the full moon, believing it connected mortal flesh to celestial realms. Ceramic residues analyzed by modern teams revealed traces of Egyptian blue pigment painted on the relief, an exotic import that underlines Seuthes' far-reaching trade ties. Along one wall, tiers of narrow benches accommodate acolytes who partake in silent meditation. Tradition holds that initiates fast for 3 days, subsisting on water mixed with ground barley and aromatic herbs. An obscure text, possibly a school exercise by a Thracian scribe, lists hallucinogenic fungi, identified by recent chemical analysis as similar to Amanita species, among the herbs used to induce visionary states. Such psychedelic accompaniments hint at rites far more complex than the simple libations depicted in Greek accounts. A priestess lights a censer, and drifting smoke reveals faint frescoes of underworld journeys. Boats crossing a dark lake, paired lions guarding a rocky gate. These images parallel Orphic cosmogonies, suggesting Thracian cults shared motifs with mystery religions from the Aegean. Yet differences emerge. The Thracian version depicts the soul's descent as a communal passage rather than an individual journey, reflecting the tribal bonds that bound Odrysian society. Historians are still debating how much of this imagery derived from Greek influence versus homegrown mythology. At the chamber's edge, a small alcove houses a stone basin with minute channels carved into its rim. Water flowed through these channels in a precise ritual sequence. First cold for purification, then warm for anointing, and finally scented with juniper oil to seal the rite. This multi-stage ablution recalls Persian purification ceremonies, raising questions about cultural exchange along Thrace's eastern borders. Leaving the inner sanctum, you ascend a narrow staircase to a rooftop terrace where open-air ceremonies honored the sun god Hestia, an uncommon Thracian practice officially introduced by Greek envoys. Stone bowls set in the floor held offerings of wheat and olives, and worshippers circled a central fire pit, dancing in counterclockwise spirals to drums and flutes. This ritual dance, called the Borton, survives in modern Bulgarian folk festivals, its origins rooted in Seuthopolis' fusion of local and imported traditions. Descending again, you find a crypt-like gallery lined with funerary steels. Each stele bears a carved image of the deceased. Warriors in full armor, noblewomen with diadems, even a few children clutching clay horses. Oriented east-west, these two markers emphasize the journey from life to death and back, an echo of Zalmoxis' teachings on rebirth. Yet the absence of grave goods, except for a single bronze mirror found in a princess's stele, suggests that the Odrysian elite rejected lavish burials in favor of spiritual continuance. Scholars are still debating whether this austerity arose from Thracian beliefs or Hellenic philosophical influence. Beyond the gallery, a hidden grotto leads to the riverine sanctuary, a water shrine where initiates performed cleansing rites in the lake's shallows. Local tradition insisted that only those who had undergone at least 2 temple initiations could enter its cold waters. Here, you wade knee-deep as priests chant invocations to waters and earth, then sprinkle sacred clay on participants' foreheads. An unusual find of iron rings scattered on the sanctuary floor suggests that earlier rites involved binding gestures, perhaps symbolic entrapment of misfortune, later abandoned in favor of gentler practices. A handful of peripheral chapels honor lesser-known deities such as Olorus, a local healing god, and Art Eva, goddess of springs. Inscriptions on votive plaques request cures for ailments ranging from gout to heartbreak, carved in both Greek and Thracian script. The trilingual nature of these inscriptions underscores Seuthopolis' cultural crossroads. Yet the precise pronunciation of Thracian words remains lost to time, leaving epigraphists to fill gaps through educated guesswork. Historians are still debating the classification of the Thracian language within the Indo-European family. Circumambulating the temple complex, you notice faint channels in the paving stones leading toward a secluded altar to chthonic gods. An inverted bronze bowl nests in a shallow pit, a receptacle for libations dedicated to underworld spirits. Graffiti carved on adjacent stones, a rare feature in sacred precincts, depicts crude images of bulls and serpents, possibly casual sketches by early pilgrims. This mingling of official iconography and folk graffiti reveals tensions between ritual formality and popular devotion. In a smaller niche, you find remnants of incense cones composed of juniper, myrrh, and a mysterious resin tentatively identified as mastic. Chemical analysis indicates that incense burned here produced a sharp, pine-like aroma distinct from Greek rites. This sensory detail highlights lesser-known aspects of Thracian worship that only modern science can reconstruct. As midday sun floods the courtyards, priests lead a Day of the Dead ceremony, an annual observance unique to Thrace in which masks resembling ancestors' faces are worn. Participants dance in silent procession, bearing clay lamps that illuminate their features in the dusk. Though Roman historians accused Thracians of nocturnal blood rituals, local inscriptions explicitly forbid such acts, favoring symbolic mimicry over violence. Scholars are still debating whether this represents an authentic Thracian reform or later sanitization by Greek-influenced elites. A sudden breeze carries the faint clap of cymbals from an adjacent hall where youth undergo martial initiations. Emerging from the shrine, you watch as novices, blindfolded with woven scarves, tackle obstacle courses within narrow corridors. Their only guide is the echo of chanting priests, reinforcing lessons in trust and discipline. Such rites mirror Spartan-Agoge traditions, yet the inclusion of ecstatic dancing and music marks a distinct Thracian twist. Whether these training methods were borrowed or independently developed remains a point of contention among scholars. You pause before a carved relief of a nine-headed serpent, a motif otherwise attested only in Scythian contexts. The presence of this figure suggests cross-pollination of steppe beliefs with local cults. No written source mentions it, making this find one of Thracian archaeology's most tantalizing mysteries. Historians are still debating its significance and origin. By late afternoon, you find yourself in a vaulted chamber where initiates recline on stone benches around a low hearth. Here, they participate in the Feast of Shadows, consuming barley cakes and dark wine in near-total darkness, led by torch-bearing acolytes. A surviving clay cup engraved with a warning, "Speak not of what is seen," implies strict secrecy. Parallels abound with Dionysian mysteries, but Thracian versions emphasize communal solidarity over ecstatic frenzy. Historians are still debating how closely these practices resembled Greek mystery cults. Exiting into the waning morning light filters through colorful awnings stretched above narrow lanes, casting prism-like patterns on wooden stalls. The air quivers with the scent of fresh herbs, cured meats, and exotic spices, an intoxicating blend that signals you've entered the beating heart of Seuthopolis's commerce. Merchants shout in a triumphant chorus, their voices weaving a polyglot tapestry. Native Thracian gutturals, lilting Greek cadences, and clipped Old Persian phrases. Timber carts rattle over cobbled alleys as traders heft heavy amphorae or arrange bolts of bright cloth on scarred trestles. Every step resonates with the city's lifeblood, exchange. Along one lane, rows of earthenware jars brim with local olive oil and river salt. Stallkeepers, often Thracian farmers in coarse wool tunics, offer samples of black and green olives cured in brine mixed with wild thyme and juniper berries. Mainstream historians note Thrace's fertile valleys produced olive oil prized even in Macedon, fueling both cuisine and lamplight across the region. Shoppers scoop olives onto clay plates, nibbling while they haggle. Midway through a sharp bargain, you notice small clay tokens shaped like horse heads tucked among the jars, good luck charms crafted by local potters to bless shipments, an obscure tradition recorded only on fragmentary kiln graffiti. Several paces away, a Greek merchant displays amphorae stamped with the seal of Byzantium. The glossy olive oil inside gleams like liquid gold under the sun. Smooth vessels imported from the Hellespont contradict the rougher, handmade jars closer by, an emblem of two trade routes converging here. You handle a sample amphora, feeling its weight and the subtle undulations in its curved form. Buyers often prefer these imports for diplomatic gifts, underscoring Seuthes' diplomatic savvy in fostering Greek alliances without sacrificing Thracian identity. Historians are still debating how much of Seuthopolis' economy relied on Greek-run merchant fleets versus native riverboats. Turning another corner, You find a Persian spice stall where saffron threads, cumin seeds, and crushed coriander gleam in broad ceramic bowls. A bindweed-scented breeze brings the heady aroma of cinnamon imported from distant Media. The merchant, clad in a linen robe dyed with indigo, ladles powdered turmeric into cloth pouches stamped with his Persian insignia. He invites you to sample a pinch. Its bittersweet warmth instantly spreads across your tongue. Fruit traders behind him hawk dried dates and candied quince, exotic sweets unfamiliar to most Thracians. This fusion of Eastern and local flavors became so integral that some city cookbooks mention Seuthopolitan stew, spiced with cumin and honey, a curious recipe preserved in a single Byzantine manuscript. Language itself is commerce here. You overhear a Thracian seller switch mid-sentence to Koine Greek when quoting a price, then slip back into Thracian for haggling with local clients. A Persian broker interjects in Old Persian to negotiate silk shipments, only to adopt Greek when speaking with visiting envoys. This fluid code switching underlines the city's role as a cultural crossroads. Epigraphists still debate whether Thracian inscriptions in Seuthopolis reflect a unique dialect influenced by Greek and Persian loanwords, or if they preserve an older, purer Thracian tongue. A row of merchant booths sells textiles spun from Thrace's sheep and dyed in madder, weld, and imported alum. Women in simple tunics run their fingers over shaded stripes, crimson the most prized, symbolizing wealth and authority. One cloth dealer jokingly warns that a rival's bolt contains too much weed dye, an insult that sparks laughter among onlookers. The market's humor often hinges on such playful barbs, a subtle break on the tension of bargaining. Meanwhile, Persian traders display intricately woven silk ribbons, their slipper-soft surfaces a novelty that draws curious glances from wealthy patrons. At a corner where 3 streets meet, a donkey cart laden with clay pots grinds to a halt. The driver, a wiry Thracian with a missing ear, hauls down wicker baskets filled with fermented mare's milk or kumis. City folk either love the sour, effervescent drink or recoil at its tangy bitterness. Thracian cavalrymen prized kumis for its supposed stamina-boosting properties, though few urbanites embraced it wholeheartedly. In one obscure reference, a visiting Spartan envoy allegedly spit his sample into the mud, calling it a warrior's curse, a crude anecdote cited by later chroniclers. Nearby, fishmongers filleting salted anchovies send sprays of brine across wooden planks. The pungent aroma mingles strangely with the sweet saffron air. Carts of mackerel and freshwater carp appear less often, but when fish arrives, eager customers cluster, bargaining by weight. One oddity, jars of fermented fish sauce akin to garum, an import from Greek coastal cities, but decorated with Thracian motifs, suggesting local workshops attempted to rival Hellenic producers. Archaeochemical studies of residue jars confirm a unique microbial profile in Seuthopolitan garum. Leatherworkers sit adjacent to tanneries, where hides undergo treatment in pits of urine and oak bark, an unmistakable stink that lingers far beyond closing time. Artisans shape cured hides into sandals, belts, and scabbard covers. One vendor proudly displays a pair of boots stamped with a griffin motif, an emblem lifted from Greek coinage, underscoring the city's penchant for blending decorative styles. Leather samples range from coarse goat to finely tanned calf, the latter commanding premium prices among nobles. Historians still debate whether Thracian tanning methods were original innovations or adaptations of Persian and Greek techniques. Just beyond, a craftsman's forge glows red-hot as ironworkers shape spearheads and ornate jewelry. Sparks leap from the anvil as hammers strike scorching metal. Necklaces of bronze and silver drape from hooks overhead, interspersed with carnelian beads and carved amber pendants. Trade items likely sourced from the Baltic. A small sign advertises wheel-made glass beads, an imported novelty prized for translucence. These beads display patterns found nowhere else, a testament to Seuthopolis's unique position in long-distance exchange networks. In the center square, a platform reserved for coin exchanges hums with activity. Shallow bowls of water allow customers to test gold and silver coins by ear. A clear ring signals purity, while a dull thud suggests base metal forgery. Local minting under Seuthes III featured horse motifs and the king's head adorned with a laurel wreath, symbols of power adapted from Greek numismatic conventions. Scholars are still debating whether the iconography emphasized military prowess or divine sanction to legitimize his rule. Against one wall, a small stall sells scrolls of parchment and bundles of papyrus, indispensable tools for merchants keeping ledgers or drafting letters. Scribes offer shorthand notations in Greek and Thracian, a craft that few masters can execute quickly. One apprentice demonstrates by scribbling a contract on wax tablets, then erasing and rewriting clauses with a stylus. Observers marvel. The society-wide emphasis on record-keeping reveals an advanced bureaucracy for a barbarian realm. Yet debates persist about whether these practices were widespread among commoners or reserved for elites. A row of food vendors offers savory and sweet fare, goat cheese drizzled with honey, barley porridge spiced with cumin, and flaky pastries stuffed with fruit preserves. A peculiar treat involves roasting chestnuts in bronze cauldrons, an obscure custom known only from a single Roman traveler's note. Tasting one yields warm sweetness punctuated by smoky char, perfect for midday sustenance as the market's bustle intensifies. Amid the clamor, an open-air shrine to Hermes Agoreos stands on a low plinth. Traders toss small coins into a shallow basin at its base for luck in negotiations. Painted reliefs of winged sandals and caduceus symbols once brightened its surface. Today, faint pigments hint at red and gold embellishments. This shrine underscores commerce's quasi-religious dimension. Profit and piety intertwined. Historians are still debating whether Hermes's cult was officially sanctioned by Seuthes or tolerated informally by merchant guilds. Children dart among legs and carts, clutching clay horse figurines they use as tokens in midday games. They race makeshift chariots along narrow lanes, betting olive pits on the winners. Their laughter cuts through the market cacophony, a reminder that daily life here blends work and play seamlessly. Apprentices observe these games, learning both speed and cunning, qualities prized in both commerce and conflict. As afternoon wanes, you notice a Persian astrologer setting up a modest tent near the spice stalls. He consults a star chart etched on a bronze disc, offering clients glimpses of future fortunes for a handful of coins. Astrology, introduced by travelers from Babylon, gained curious popularity here, though Thracian elders frowned upon excessive reliance on celestial omens. Scholars are still debating how prevalent astrology truly was among Seuthopolis's inhabitants. Overhead, merchants raise colored awnings to shield produce from the harsh sun. Under their shade, deals conclude with a flourish. Flames dance across low wooden tables laden with platters of spiced meats, glinting bronze cups, and earthenware bowls heaped with vibrant fruits. Long benches carved from oak logs creak beneath the weight of gourmands, as torchlight flickers over carved stone reliefs of hunting dogs and sacrificial rams. A troupe of musicians sits in a corner, their lyres and drums setting a slow, hypnotic beat. You find yourself reclining on a cushion beside the king's cousin, an anxious noble whose silken tunic is already stained with grape juice. This is no mere supper. Tonight's banquet is a performance, a display of Seuthes III's wealth and power that rivals any Greek symposium. Before you sip from a goblet of wine diluted with water and scented with pine resin, a servant pours honeyed spiced wine, known locally as oinos melocraton, into a shallow cup. Thracian vintners borrowed Greek techniques after alliances formed around 330 BCE, cultivating vineyards along sun-warmed hillsides. Archaeological digs near Seuthopolis have uncovered dozens of olive-stamped amphorae that once held local wine, pointing to a robust viticulture under Odrysian patronage. Even so, some scholars debate whether these vineyards primarily served the elite or whether ordinary citizens also enjoyed regular access to fermented grapes. A platter arrives, heaped with roasted boar glazed in pomegranate molasses and sprinkled with crushed poppy seeds. The meat yields under your dagger, releasing steam tinged with sweetness and earth. Boar hunting was an esteemed Thracian pastime. Wild boar tusks even appear on silver belt plaques, and serving boar at royal feasts symbolized martial prowess. An obscure footnote in a Byzantine chronicle mentions that Seuthes once challenged Macedonian guests to a boar hunting contest before inviting them to the table. Whether that contest ended well for everyone remains unclear, but the anecdote highlights the theatricality woven into these gatherings. Between courses, harpists lean into the torchlight, plucking mournful tunes that echo through vaulted chambers. You lean forward, catching whispered gossip. One senator's daughter has been seen consorting with a Persian envoy, loud enough for half the hall to overhear. The rumor elicits titters and polite coughs. Banquets doubled as political theaters, where alliances formed over spilled wine and broken bread. Mainstream sources note that Thracian kings like Seuthes used these occasions to solidify loyalties, distributing lavish gifts of fine textiles and ornate jewelry to favored guests. Yet whether gifts cemented genuine loyalty or merely inflated the royal treasury remains a point of contention among historians. A second service glides in, bowls of barley porridge enriched with goat cheese and studded with bits of dried figs. Thracian cooks prized locally sourced cheese for its tang, often mixing it with honey and ground walnuts as a palate cleanser before heavier dishes. Some culinary fragments suggest they also added a pinch of asafoetida, a pungent resin imported from the south, to aid digestion, though taste buds then were either braver or more desperate. The variety of flora found in ceramic residue analyses confirms a sophisticated use of wild herbs. Dill, thyme, and mountain marjoram all feature prominently in your spoonful. By torchlit recess, a curious tray of dormice pastries appears on a silver platter. Tiny rodents stuffed with pine nuts and honey were a rare delicacy borrowed from Etruscan tables and popular among Thracian elites who delighted in novelty. This peculiar treat survived in province recipes long after the main city's fall, a culinary oddity that puzzled later Byzantines. While mainstream accounts of Thracian cuisine rarely mention dormice, tile graffiti found in villa kitchens outside Seuthopolis depict stylized mouse motifs, evidence that at least one cook found them delightful enough to immortalize in clay. Laughter swells as a group of rowdy cavalry officers challenges each other to toasts of fermented mare's milk, or kumis. Though most city dwellers prefer grape wine, cavalry units prize kumis for its energizing properties on long campaigns. The sharp, tangy brew froths in tall goblets, and one brash officer grins and downs his portion in one gulp. He slaps you on the back, nearly spilling the next round, and declares that kumis is true Thracian lightning. Visitors from Macedon recoiled at first taste, later admitting its virtues only after several bowls. Today, scholars debate how widespread kumis consumption was in urban settings versus frontier encampments. As the main roast, suckling lamb stuffed with wild herbs and wild garlic, arrives, you inhale its heady aroma. Thracian shepherds reared sheep on highland pastures, and lamb became a staple at festivals honoring Zalmoxis. On rare occasions, venison replaces lamb, though boar remains the quintessential royal meat. A side dish of turnips and leeks braised in amphor-striped wine adds a tart counterpoint. The combination of sweet, savory, and tangy flavors dazzles the palate, a culinary philosophy likely influenced by neighboring Hellenistic kingdoms. Yet whether Thracian chefs developed these pairings independently or under Greek tutelage continues to spark scholarly debate. Between bites, a troupe of masked dancers emerges, their linen tunics dyed in vivid reds and blacks. They sway in measured steps around a brazier, their faces concealed behind carved wooden masks depicting half-human, half-animal visages. These performances echo the Borton rites you witnessed in temple precincts, bringing sacred movement into profane spaces. Their rhythms slow, quicken, then snap to silence as a chariot-shaped incense burner glows behind them. The effect is both mesmerizing and slightly unnerving, a reminder that Thracian culture blurred lines between worship and entertainment. A scholar seated nearby gabbers on about the origin of these dances, claiming they derive from Orphic initiations brought by Greek mystics. A rival snorts, insisting they predate any Hellenic contact and stem from indigenous Thracian warrior cults. Historians are still debating this question, pitting literary sources against archaeological finds of dance figurines in burial mounds. You lean back, intrigued by the argument's ferocity, and wonder how much of Seuthopolis's culture was truly Thracian at heart. The feast's liquid centerpiece arrives in full, a massive crater of wine mixed with mountain honey and crushed juniper berries. Servants pour from its brim into cups carved from olive wood. Honey wine, or medivina, provides a sweeter alternative to standard oinos, and the addition of juniper gives it a piney bite. Some file fragments reveal traces of prussic acid, a byproduct of fermenting elderberries, suggesting occasional accidental poisoning at unwary banquets. Whether rumor or reality, the possibility lends a frisson of danger to every sip. Nearby, a carved limestone slab supports a serving of wild mushrooms roasted in olive oil. Not the common button mushrooms of Greece, but a local species with mottled caps and slightly bitter stems. A surviving botanical treatise fragment attributes mild hallucinogenic properties to these fungi, though whether guests actually experienced visions or merely imagined them under heavy drinking is unclear. Scholars are still debating whether Thracian feasts occasionally included psychoactive elements. Between courses, the king himself raises a golden goblet in a toast to Zalmoxis and Seuthes' guests. His speech is brief but pointed. He praises shared bloodlines through marriage alliances, the fertility of Thracian lands, and hints at new road projects linking Seuthopolis to distant mints and markets. A subtle metaphor likens his court to a well-stirred cup of wine, diverse ingredients blended into a harmonious whole. The assembled audience applauds, and nobles clink cups with hearty enthusiasm. Dessert brings skewers of goat cheese drizzled with fig syrup and garnished with pomegranate arils. Tiny phallic-shaped pastries appear on the side, a playful nod to fertility rituals that evokes a modest blush among conservative guests. These pastries, shaped like miniature columns topped with grape clusters, reference the city's architecture and agricultural bounty in one whimsical bite. Few cookbooks mention this design, making it a rare example of edible propaganda celebrating Seuthes' vision. At a lower dais, philosophers sip diluted wine while debating the nature of pleasure. One argues that wine's true purpose is moderation and social harmony, echoing Greek symposiasts. Another counters that excess reveals inner truths, a perspective they attribute to Dionysian cults. Historians are still debating whether Thracian symposium culture emphasized restraint or revelry. You catch snatches of their debate, amused at how familiar academic spats feel even here on the edge of the Hellenic world. A sudden hush falls as a serving of sweetmeats arrives. Candied rose petals and honey-glazed almonds tossed with crushed mint. The fragrance is heady, and guests pause to savor each bite in solemn appreciation. The almond hulls, stained pink from rose infusion, appear almost jewel-like scattered across the serving bowl. This confection, known as glyca, traveled from Persian courts, its recipe adapted by Thracian confectioners who added local wild mint for sharp contrast. The result is a dessert both familiar and exotic. As the feast winds down, morning sunlight glints off the crenellations and arrow slits as you step onto the wide ramparts of Seuthopolis. Each stone underfoot bears the weight of centuries-old ambition. Rammed earth packed between alternating courses of native fieldstone and imported Greek limestone, the result of a hybrid technique praised by Hellenic engineers and adapted by Thracian builders to tame the unstable floodplain. In the chilly dawn air, a faint breeze stirs clay horse figurines embedded at regular intervals in the mortar. Good luck charms pressed into the walls by superstitious laborers. Even now, you can almost hear those ancient hands tapping and whispering blessings. The hum of distant craftsmen carries faintly on the wind, mingled with the hush of water lapping beyond the outer moat, as if the entire city exhales beneath your feet. Before Seuthes III's engineers imported lime mortar and studied Hellenic hydraulic manuals, ordinary earthen ramparts would have crumbled under spring floods. This deliberate fusion of local materials with Greek innovations created a surprisingly resilient barrier. Historians are still debating whether the choice of rammed earth was a strategic necessity dictated by geography or a symbolic statement of unity between Thracian heritage and Hellenic sophistication. Beneath the ramparts, foundation trenches snake into the saturated soil like hidden arteries. A labyrinth of ceramic drainage pipes, fashioned from broken amphora shards repurposed by ingenious local potters, channels excess rainwater away from the wall's base, preventing rot and collapse during torrential downpours. The sight of these pipes, laid in precise, sloping channels, testifies to a level of hydraulic engineering rarely seen north of the Aegean. Echoes of rhythmic chants once drifted across these trenches as laborers stomped clay and stone into wooden molds, a ritual believed to synchronize the wall's spirit with the land. Scattered artifacts, sheep's wool tokens and small bronze bells, found in 21st century digs hint that workers might have used jingling sound to detect voids in the drying walls, blending superstition with quality control. The repeated repairs recorded in archival tablets suggest that even Opus Criticium demanded relentless maintenance, a price Seuthes paid to achieve both security and symbolism. High, square towers punctuate the curtain wall at even intervals, each standing like a silent sentry surveying the plains. Rising some 30 feet above the parapets, these towers boast arrow slits carved into keyhole shapes, providing archers with commanding fields of fire while minimizing their own exposure. Peering through one slit, you can trace the curve of the river miles away and spot the faint smoke of distant settlements. Between two towers, you notice metal braces embedded in the stone, evidence of swivel-mounted ballistae capable of hurling bolts hundreds of feet. Only a few scant references in Byzantine military manuals mention Thracian torsion engines, so these brace marks remain one of the most obscure clues to Seuthopolis's offensive capabilities. Scholars are still debating whether these devices served as practical defenses or polished demonstrations meant to intimidate rivals. Beyond the battlements, a deep dry moat rings the city like a second wall. When spring floods arrive, hidden sluice gates redirect river water into the trench, transforming it into a murky canal no enemy could wade through. At other times, the moat doubles as a reservoir, its levels carefully managed by stone-lined weirs that drip excess water back into the river. Leaning over the edge, you glimpse rows of sharpened wooden stakes, remnants of past seasons, meant to impale any who dared cross. Local legend claims these stakes were once painted with red ochre to terrify attackers. Though no pigment traces remain, medieval dredging recovered frog skeletons amid the stakes, suggesting a bizarre practice of placing live amphibians to startle invaders. The dual role of moat as deterrent, reservoir, and psychological weapon underscores Thracian ingenuity in marrying practicality with theatrics. Crossing the narrow stone bridge that spans the moat, you arrive at the city's grand gate, a triumphal arch carved from massive ashlar blocks. Twin lions crouch in fierce relief on either side, their stylized manes echoing Persian royal motifs. Beneath each paw, a globe symbolizes dominion over land and water, an implicit claim that Seuthopolis holds the world in balance. Above the architrave, a bold Thracian inscription proclaims Seuthes III, King of Kings, a direct echo of Achaemenid titles meant to awe dignitaries before they even entered. This singular use of Thracian script, rather than Greek, suggests a deliberate assertion of native sovereignty in a heavily Hellenized landscape. Debates among epigraphers continue over whether foreign courts acknowledged this grandiose title or whether it functioned solely as domestic propaganda. Inside the gatehouse, huge wooden doors reinforced with bronze studs and iron bands swing open to reveal a vaulted courtyard. A heavy portcullis, its grooves carved deep into the stone jambs, rests raised by iron winches hidden behind false panels. Faint notches in the metalwork bear witness to daily use, remnants of countless ropes and chains. Graffiti etched into the inner walls, sketched hearts, initials, and crude jokes in Thracian and Greek. Hint at bored guards and visiting lovers alike, carving small rebellions into the fortress's severe lines. Torches accentuate the grain of the wood and the fine detail of the carving, as if illuminating stories long since silenced by stone. Flanking the courtyard, guardrooms bristle with spearmen and archers during shifts. The scent of damp stone, rubbed leather, and spilled wine hangs in the air, punctuated by low voices trading jokes in a blend of Thracian and Koine Greek. In one corner, a weathered shrine to Hercules displays a miniature altar where soldiers pour wine offerings before ascending to the parapets. The lion-headed niche above the shrine recalls the triumphal arch outside, weaving martial ritual through every layer of the defense. These spaces, where camaraderie and superstition meet, transform walls into living expressions of communal identity. A narrow postern gate, the infamous Sally Port, lurks inconspicuously beneath a projecting tower. Its latch, hidden under a loose threshold stone, opens onto a secret cobblestone alley running the length of the perimeter. Siege chronicles carved into pottery shards reference surprise sorties launched through this very opening, but local gossip insists it served more often for furtive smuggling runs. Contraband, fine silks, rare spices, even sacrificial animals. slipped through here when official channels were too expensive or too closely watched. The practicality of dual-purpose passages reveals the blurred line between civic security and opportunistic trade. Historians are still debating this question. Above the sallyport, a vaulted corridor links tower to tower behind the ramparts. Here, a stenciled pulley system hung from stout wooden beams, raising ammunition and supplies directly to the wall walk without exposing porters to enemy fire. A beam fragment unearthed in 2016 still bears carved notches where ropes once ran, a rare artifact illustrating the logistical foresight of Hellenistic engineers. Footsteps echo predictably in this enclosed space, offering both shelter from aerial attack and the ominous reminder that even stone walls must be fed and manned. Turning toward the river, you encounter two sweeping coastal bastions, semicircular bulwarks designed to split currents and repel invading barges. Carved cutwaters launch glinting in the sun, angled just so to prevent ice buildup and to deflect battering rams. Between them, a sturdy drawbridge of oak planks bound with iron chains spans the gap. Local lore claims small frog sculptures perched on the bastions croaked when the bridge moved, a light-hearted morale trick for watchmen to break the monotony. Though no contemporary texts confirm this, occasional frog bones dredged from the moat add curious support to the tale. Past the riverside defenses, a belt of earthen ditches and sharpened palisades extends across the southern approach. Scouts astride Thracian ponies patrol this outer ring, scanning the horizon for dust clouds by day and ominous sounds by night. Carved tally marks on nearby posts record weeks of duty, hinting at a rotation system that scraped manpower from surrounding villages. A civic levy that some later accounts criticized as onerous taxation. Scholars debate whether such conscription fostered unity through shared responsibility or bred resentment among rural populations. Embedded within the southern wall, a small chapel dedicated to a protective deity offers spiritual armor to the city's defenders. Frescoes of winged guardians flank its stone doorway, and inside, a simple altar bears dark stains from daily libations of oil and wine. An inscription above pledges, "Safety for the watchful," merging piety with pragmatism. Centuries before Byzantine fortress chapels became standard, Seuthopolis's defenders knelt here, seeking divine favor alongside their own steel. By dusk, torches ignite along ramparts and towers, transforming the walls into a jeweled horizon. Lantern-lit corridors echo with the measured footsteps of relay shifts as guards relieve one another. A lone homing pigeon coos from a carved niche in the gatehouse, an ever-present reminder that messages once flew swifter than foot and horse. The worn steps catch in the heart of the artisan district, shafts of sunlight pierce dusty air, illuminating rows of workshops where stone and metal are coaxed into shape by skilled hands. You approach a vast hall lined with wooden scaffolds and workbenches, each cluttered with chisels, hammers, and metal rasps. The scent of stone dust mingles with the acrid tang of molten bronze, creating an atmosphere of primal creativity. Here, the raw materials of Seuthopolis's grandeur are transformed. Massive marble blocks become temple columns, and glowing bronze blooms into icons of gods and warriors. The rhythmic clang of metal on stone and the hiss of quenching metal welds the workshop quarter into a living forge of artistry and ambition. You step past a row of apprentices polishing granite blocks, each square foot marked with faint chalk lines guiding the master sculptor's work. Underfoot, chips of marble crunch like snow as you pass a low table strewn with scale models, minuscule renditions of temple pediments carved weeks earlier. Your hand hovers over one such model, a griffin poised on its haunches, its wings unfolded in silent flight. The master carver, a burly man with forearms like twisted ropes, glances up, offering you a nod before returning to his relief of a Thracian hero. Even in miniature, the precision astonishes. Every feather and muscle rendered faithful to life. Rough-hewn monoliths stand along the hall's periphery, quarried from the lake's southern shore and floated upriver on barges. Workers in leather aprons marked the stone faces with red ochre, outlining the shapes of columns or statuary. One such block bears the faded outline of a Corinthian capital, an experimental fusion of Greek ornament and Thracian motifs. The import of marble from Paros, attested by amphora labels found near ancient docks, required months-long sea voyages and river transport, a logistical feat that underlines Seuthes III's commitment to architectural grandeur. Historians are still debating which Greek colony facilitated the initial shipments of Parian marble to Thrace. You find yourself drawn to a station where stonemasons carve decorative reliefs destined for temple friezes. A youth, chisel in hand, chips away excess marble, revealing a procession of deities led by a four-horse chariot. Dust swirls around your feet as flakes of stone drift to the ground. The master mason stops mid-stroke to demonstrate a subtle undercut technique, explaining, without a Greek interpreter, that sharp shadows make the figures come alive at dawn's low angle. According to mainstream archaeological reports, Thracian sculptors achieved a depth of field rivaling that of mainland Hellenistic workshops by the early 3rd century BCE. Nestled beside the carving benches is a small basin where artisans rinse their chisels. Embedded in the stone rim are tiny red flecks, traces of a rare manganese pigment used to highlight veins in marble statues. This obscure decorative practice appears only at Seuthopolis and a single Carian shrine, suggesting a shared workshop tradition or itinerant craftsman. Whether these manganese highlights adorned columns or cloaked heroes in relief remains uncertain, but their presence reveals an experimental flair in Thracian stonework. Archaeometric analyses confirm the pigment's origin in eastern Thrace, making it one of the region's most curious footnotes. A narrow alley off the main hall leads to a heated chamber where molten bronze is poured. On a low platform, you witness the lost wax casting method in action. A composite wax model, coated in clay, brews in a kiln until its interior liquefies, draining away to leave a perfect void. With a hiss and a roar, molten bronze, an alloy of copper and tin, is ladled through a spout into the mold. As the metal cools, a chorus of sparks dances at the vent holes. When the clay shell cracks away, the newly minted figurine emerges. A 3-inch statue of Bendis, her moon diadem faintly etched. The intricate process demonstrates that Thracian bronzesmiths mastered techniques as sophisticated as those taught in Rhodes or Athens. You rub the back of your hand along a cooling bronze chariot while left on a workbench. Its spokes, still gleaming with fire scale, bear the faint impression of the wax model's wood grain, an unintended fingerprint from the artisan's workshop. Nearby, a vestibule displays fragments of broken molds, marked with names scratched into the clay: Aristo N. Zalm, Thesis. These makers' marks, rare in Hellenistic contexts, suggest that individual smiths took pride in their work and claimed authorship. A fragmentary inscription on one mold identifies Ariston the Younger as the creator of a set of helmet decorations, an intriguing hint at family workshops spanning generations. Shadowed alcoves house rows of small tools, bronze chisels of graduated widths, wooden mallets carved from beech, and pumice blocks used to polish marble to a burnished sheen. Apprentices sharpen flat-bladed chisels against sandstone before quarries deliver fresh blocks. A battered mortar and pestle in one corner holds traces of resin and animal fat, a mixture used to lubricate tools and reduce dust during carving. This practical innovation predates similar recipes recorded by Roman engineers by 2 centuries, an example of Thracian ingenuity often overlooked in broader studies of ancient technology. Beyond the bronze chamber, a second hall brims with girders of copper ingots awaiting refinement. You watch as a pair of smiths strike ingots on an anvil perched atop granite, hammering impurities to the edges, then folding the metal back on itself. The repeated forge welding strengthens the bronze, a technique well documented in Greek naval industries but rarely seen in inland workshops. Each fold leaves cold shuts and grain patterns visible under close inspection, a metallurgical fingerprint. According to excavated slag analyses, some Thracian bronze exceeded 12% tin content, producing a pale, silvery sheen prized by swordmakers for its durability. A low wooden bench displays dozens of votive statuettes, cast in varying alloys: copper-tin bronze, arsenical bronze, and an experimental mix including fragments of silver jewelry. One tiny figure of a horse, no more than an inch long, exhibits a high-pitched ring when struck, a test of alloy quality known among smiths as the bell test. Archaeologists uncovered this practice in a 1978 excavation of a tomb just outside Seuthopolis's walls, linking funerary offerings to workshop quality control. Such crossovers between craft and ritual highlight the blurred boundaries between religion and industry. You pause at a long, narrow forge where bellows hiss like serpents as charcoal glows red-hot. A smith wearing a leather apron and a protective leather cap tosses in a handful of copper ore and tin ingots, stirring the molten bath with a long iron rod. Sparks fly and the air fills with the sharp scent of burning coal. The smith ladles the alloy into smaller crucibles for decorative work. Bracelets, fibulae, helmet fittings, each piece later polished in the cold water troughs set into stone basins. Folklore credits some Thracian smiths with whispering protective charms over each pour, though no written record confirms such incantations. Amid the clamor, an apprentice tinkers with a cast mold for a small bowl, experimenting with subtle variations in clay composition to reduce cracking. He grinds local clay with fine ash from olive oil lamps, a combination that proved resistant to high temperatures. This obscure recipe appears only in one workshop ledger fragment. Yet the survival of a single page suggests a broader codified knowledge once circulated among master craftsmen. The clay's thermal resilience made it ideal for large-scale columns too, indicating that interdisciplinary exchange between stone and metal workshops enriched both crafts. Along a mezzanine, graffiti scratches across plastered walls. Names and nicknames, Teles, Maros, Besha, etched at head height by bored apprentices, reveal a multilingual community speaking Thracian, Greek, and even Old Persian. One graffiti sketch depicts a crudely drawn lion's head, likely modeled after the triumphal gate reliefs. These informal markings underscore that artisans lived and worked in vibrant cultural exchange. Debates persist over whether these graffiti functioned as territorial marks of individual workshops or simply as idle doodles by restless hands. Historians are still debating this question. The social status of these craftsmen emerges in a nearby courtyard, where a group collects wages in small leather pouches sealed with clay tokens. A ledger carved on a wooden tablet lists daily pay rates. 2 bronze obols for apprentices, 10 for journeymen, and 20 for master sculptors. Whether these artisans ranked as free citizens or semi-autonomous slaves under the Odrysian hierarchy remains unclear. Epigraphic evidence offers conflicting interpretations. Some argue that workshop masters held substantial civic standing, voting rights in local councils, while others point to legal codes listing craftsmen alongside captive laborers. Historians are still debating this question. Toward evening, a brass trumpet sits on a rack, its surface scratched by frequent polishing. This musical instrument, cast in bronze and embellished with engraved grapevine patterns, blends form and function. A call to arms and a ceremonial trumpet allow. Morning light slants through broken columns and casts pale shafts across the necropolis carved into the lakefront cliffs. Shadows pool in the crevices of tomb entrances, their lintels bearing curious bas-reliefs of half-human, half-animal figures whose intent stares seem to follow you as you approach. A low wind rustles through broken pottery shards underfoot, carrying the faint echo of ancient footsteps. Here, among these rock-cut sepulchres, every carved stone becomes a voice from the past, speaking in visual riddles that demand to be read. Beneath a vaulted lintel, you pause to examine the frescoed portal. A striding griffin man, its avian claws planted firmly on a carved threshold. Red ochre paint remains in the creature's wing membranes, while traces of lead-white highlight its arched brow. Egyptian blue pigment, rare this far north, peeks from cracks where mortar once held painted tiles in place. Evidence of trade networks stretching beyond the Aegean. Modern analyses suggest oil-based binders mixed with local clay slip, a technique otherwise attested only at a Thessalian shrine, hinting at shared artisan knowledge. Stepping inside the tomb's antechamber, you find walls plastered with totemic imagery. Fish-headed men clutching tridents, boar-faced warriors brandishing spears, and a single, oddly solitary image of a woman's torso with a serpent's tail. Scholars argue whether these figures represent clan emblems or guardian spirits, invoked to protect the deceased on their journey to the underworld. Oral traditions from nearby villages still whisper that placing a ceramic boar token under your pillow will ensure safe passage through dreams, a custom doubtless inspired by these very totems. At the far end, a fresco shows a centaur-like huntsman circling an oak tree, his bow taut as he aims at an antlered stag. Patches of violet pigment, manganese-based and seldom used in Thracian art, trace the stag's fur, highlighting its otherworldliness. One obscure fragmentary text calls this scene the flight of the wild king, a myth otherwise lost, suggesting that Seuthes' court commissioned original narratives alongside imported iconography. Whether this centaur represents a Thracian version of Greek myth or a homegrown hero remains contested. Beyond the painted chamber, a low arch leads to a hypogeum carved under an earthen tumulus. Most Thracian tombs sat beneath grassy mounds, but here the rock-cut design elevates status, marking the occupant as someone of exceptional rank. A circular bench carved into the walls once held libation bowls. Today, an empty ring of grooves hints at rituals performed to spill wine and honey over the steps. These libations echoed the Greek custom of koi, yet here bloodless offerings were mandated by local decree. Historians still debate whether animal blood ever stained these floors despite official bans. Outside, monolithic stelae stand sentinel over each tomb's entrance, carved in local sandstone. Their surfaces bear reliefs of the deceased in ceremonial garb, helmets decorated with griffin crests, cloaks clasped with ornate fibulae. One unusually tall stele depicts its occupant wielding a python staff, a symbol otherwise unique to Scythian-influenced sites east of the Volga. This anomaly fuels debate. Was this individual a mercenary of exotic origin, or did the Odrysian elite adopt outsider symbols to bolster prestige? Alongside the stele, stone offering tables carved from single limestone slabs feature shallow bowls and narrow channels for libations. One table bears a rare labyrinth motif in low relief, a design largely absent in Thrace but common in Minoan shrines. This graphic puzzle may represent the soul's winding path after death, though some argue it's merely decorative. The labyrinth's precise carving suggests a master mason trained abroad, perhaps in Knossos, but definitive connections remain elusive. A narrow gallery leads to the tomb's innermost sanctuary, its door framed by zigzag patterns cut deep into the rock. These angular designs mirror motifs found in local Kilim weavings, implying that textile artists and stone carvers shared geometric vocabularies. Some ethnographers propose that these patterns served as protective symbols, an ancient ward baked into the stone. Others view them purely as artistic ornamentation, evidence of convergent design rather than direct transmission. At midday, sunlight falls through a small oculus in the burial chamber's roof, illuminating the fresco of a ship-headed creature, half fish, half dragon, its mouth open in eternal invitation. Archaeologists note that the oculus alignment on the summer solstice would spotlight this image at dawn, perhaps reenacting a mythic journey of the soul across cosmic waters. Yet critics contend that this alignment might be coincidental, a byproduct of tomb orientation along natural fault lines rather than intentional design. Local lore insists that on moonless nights, the totem figures animate under starlight, their painted eyes flickering with life. Shepherds once refused to graze flocks near these tombs after sunset, fearing curses unleashed by restless spirits. Though such legends likely postdate Seuthopolis' heyday, they reveal how carved images continued to shape living memory long after pillars crumbled. Debates rage in scholarly journals over the origins of these hybrid motifs. Some posit direct influence from Scythian steppe art, complete with animal-style interlace, brought by nomadic warriors hired as royal bodyguards. Others argue for independent Thracian invention, drawing on indigenous animist traditions predating any external contact. New finds of steppe-style metal plaques in a nearby warrior grave intensify the discussion, but consensus remains distant. Venturing further, you discover an open tomb where a colonnaded portico of monolithic pillars lines the entry path. Each pillar sports a carved totem head, lion, boar, and eagle, stacked like precious beads. Archaeologists liken this arrangement to Lamassu guardian figures of the Near East, yet local variants show a distinctly Thracian flair. Manes rendered with looped incisions and beaks flattened into geometric planes. Whether these guardians signaled divine protection or asserted dynastic lineage is still under review. Between the pillars stand slender obelisks, each carved with a sequence of symbols: sun discs, crescent moons, and stag antlers. Some interpret this as a lunar calendar marking agricultural festivals. Others see coded genealogical records mapping princely descent. The precise repetition of antler motifs, 4 on each obelisk, suggests a link to seasonal rites, but without written keys, the symbols remain enigmatic. Above the portico, a massive door lintel displays a row of hemispherical bosses carved into the stone surface. These droplet motifs, set in regular intervals, may have held bronze studs or colored glass inlays once gleaming in torchlight. The arrangement echoes motifs on Thracian shields and bucklers, perhaps uniting martial and funerary iconography. No intact examples survive, but microscopic residues support the theory of once bright inlays. Behind the portico lies a narrow passage lined with frescoes of vine scrolls and pomegranates, symbols of fertility for both life and afterlife. One panel depicts a robed figure offering a fruit to a seated warrior, a scene scholars link to mythic hospitality rituals among Thracian tribes. The pomegranate's seed-filled interior may have symbolized rebirth, a motif echoed in Greek funerary art, yet here infused with tribal meaning unique to these slopes. A final chamber awaits, a circular rotunda with a domed ceiling painted in concentric rings of red, white, and black. At its apex, a solitary sun disk bursts forth, encircled by radiating rays. Fresco fragments show that the central motif once incorporated gold leaf, a rarity in Thracian contexts. Some suggest this golden sun reflected actual sunlight via a polished metal mirror positioned above the oculus, creating a blinding divine spectacle. Skeptics, pointing to recent structural tests, argue that no such mirror support existed. Historians are still debating this question. As you retrace your steps toward the surface, a final relief catches your eye. A pair of entwined serpents carved low on a threshold stone. Only 2 copies of this motif appear in the entire site, both near entrances to high-status tombs. Scholars link the serpents to chthonic guardians or symbols of infinity, but their precise function remains uncertain. The rarity of the motif makes each occurrence precious evidence in piecing together Thracian mortuary beliefs. Emerging into the fading light, you reflect on how every carved surface in this necropolis preserves a fragment of a vanished worldview. Myth and memory intertwine in stone and pigment, blending local traditions with borrowed iconographies. The half-human, half-animal totems stand as eloquent witnesses to a culture negotiating identity on the frontier of empires. A Thracian voice speaking through marble and mortar. Tonight, you leave symbols in stone with your mind alive with ancient patterns and spectral guardians. These silent carvings continue their vigil, long after horns have stilled and temples have sunk beneath silt. The meanings they encoded may be lost to time. Dawn breaks with an unnerving tremor that courses through flagstones and mud brick walls alike. A distant rumble rolls across the terraces, setting shutters to rattling and loosening pottery perched on wooden shelves. Few pause their morning routines. An owl's hoot far inland or a herd's distant lowing could produce similar vibrations. Yet when the earth shudders again, sharper this time, an uneasy hush settles over Seuthopolis. Farmers pause with yokes still across their shoulders. Water carriers clutch amphorae tight as the lake's surface ripples in concentric rings, betraying movements beneath. On the riverbank, traders hesitate, mules' hooves skidding in shallow mud as guides murmur of ill omens. Wild reeds tremble like grasshoppers at dusk, and the very air tastes of unsettled promise. Only the city's engineers, versed in Greek treatises on hydraulics and embankment works, exchange knowing glances. They've detected similar quakes when testing pressure on the new upstream embankment. Seuthes III commissioned this colossal dam months ago to seize control of seasonal floods, hoping to irrigate sun-parched fields and fortify the city's defenses. Now those carefully piled earthworks, an earthen wall nearly 100 feet high, reverberate with each tremor, as if protesting their own existence. Crossing a narrow alley lined with shuttered workshops, you sense the clay beneath your sandals quivering. In one forge, a smith's hammer falters mid-strike. The anvil's dull clang yields to a metallic ring as the ground shifts. Bronze goblets tremble on open-air tables, sending a tiny cascade of sparks across the stone floor. Across the panoplied courtyard, apprentices stop polishing marble statues, letting mallets dangle at their sides. They exchange fearful glances, recalling local legends that the lake sleeps jealous dreams. Spirits once drowned in its depths, now restless beneath every ripple. Venturing toward the dam's shadow, you pass leagues of terraced vineyards, now luxuriant with grapes ripening under August sun. Vines cling to wooden trellises hewn from oak. Clusters hang heavy enough to bow the slender frames. Yet the dam promises to redirect these fertile floods away from vine roots, irrigating new fields on drier highlands. Surveyors inscribed angular channels into the limestone, each carved groove promising bounty. But the ground's sudden heaves transform these irrigation veins into fault lines, and soil shifts under vine roots echo like quiet sighs of distress. By midday, the tremors intensify. A low thunder grows beneath the regular cuckoo calls and the bray of beasts. Workers transporting stone blocks to reinforce the embankment freeze mid-lift. The engineer in charge, a Pella-trained specialist with ink-black curls and wary eyes, lifts a hand, signaling a halt. He consults a reed pen and wax tablet, comparing scheduled stress tests with real-time measurements of embankment deflection. His colleagues, sweat beading at their brows, divide between faith in their calculations and dread of what untested soil might unleash. At the central agora, benches carved of slate rattle as townspeople gather, eyes upward to cloudless skies. Seated near a granite column, you overhear a counselor argue. Our methods mirror those of Antioch and Sardis. They built dams stretching valleys. Our embankment spans only a river's width. Another counters, Thracian earth is stubborn. We've seen ravines swallow smaller levees. This is no minor undertaking, but our city thirsts for expansion. Historians are still debating whether Thracians possessed the hydraulic expertise for such grand projects or whether they overreached, relying too heavily on borrowed Greek manuals. On a raised platform, a harpist strikes a nervous chord, her melody cutting through murmured prayers to Zalmoxis. Beneath the platform's marble edge, incised Inachoi fragments hint that just days earlier, festival libations honored water spirits. An ironic precaution now forgotten in the clamor for agricultural reform. A priest presses a hand to the cracked marble, whispering apologies to the lake, promising bloodless offerings of honey and wine if its fury subsides. In twilight's amber glow, you climb a stair toward the dam crest. From here, you overlook half the city. Rooftops shimmer like fish scales, and the temple's towers rise like carved lances. Yet beyond the granite buttresses, the embankment looms, a ridge of gray earth crowned with timber walkways. Engineers march along its spine, carrying measuring rods that flash against the dying sun. Each step they take seems to hum beneath their sandals, as if the ridge itself pulses with concealed energy. Below, a lullaby of water seeping through clay seems drips into wooden troughs. The sound, constant but uneven, whispers of hidden springs awakened by shifting soils. One engineer plunges his staff into a seep, examining muddy water for sediment lines. He notes fine particles of crushed limestone, evidence that core materials erode at an alarming rate. Another shudders, recalling that Minoan engineers built the earliest known dams centuries ago. Simple earthwork embankments that failed under heavy rains. Yet Thrace's heavy winter snows swell rivers far more than Crete's Mediterranean rains ever did. Legends say that after a great tremor in the ancient town of Perinthus, fear claimed the lives of entire families who leapt from collapsing towers. Nobody here mentions that story aloud, but whispers circulate. If the dam breaks, the city will drown in its own promise. Brides clutch protective amulets beneath their veils, and frontier soldiers tighten leather straps on their cuirasses, ready for any tactics in wading through swollen waters. Late that night, a pale moon casts a silver sheen on the dam crest. Engineers stand at intervals, torches flickering in glass lanterns hung from oak stanchions. They peer into the black void of the spillway, measuring its width by eye. Below the spillway channel, a massive trench lined with rough-cut stone, yawns like a gullet awaiting its meal. The channel's side walls show hairline cracks lit by torchlight, their paths snaking toward the surface. Each fracture, no thicker than a finger's breadth, hints at hidden faults. A distant clang, metal on stone, breaks the night's hush. A guard atop the dam knocks his bronze kettle, a signal that tremors return. The kettle's ring vibrates through the confined corridor, prompting all torches to sway. The engineer note-takes by flickering light, his quill scratching frantic lines. He rubs his temple, tasting copper on his tongue, fearing he must choose between reinforcing the dam and bidding citizens to flee. Yet panic races as fast as water. Gates will open only when levee repairs reach a critical hour. Meanwhile, in the temple of Bendis, priests awaken with urgent prayers. Incense cones of pine resin glow on braziers, and the scent wafts through colonnades. A high priestess offers the first words of the night. Mother of the moon, guide our city through trembling earth. Let not your silver tears drown our hopes. The devotion echoes off marble columns. Yet outside, the marble's white sheen seems a fragile memory in the face of earthen might. By the second midnight watch, the tremors become rhythmic, a slow pulse matched by the dam's heartbeat of water pressure. Thunderous rumblings roll like distant waves, and the dam's crest trembles under every footstep. Guards send riders ahead to raise alarms in low-lying districts, banging bronze shields on stone plates until echoes reach tavern doors. Drums from the palace quarter beat a war cadence, summoning civic volunteers to muster at the gates. In a hastily convened emergency council, Seuthes III stands beneath the blazing torchlight of the hall. His silhouette looms large against frescoed walls depicting laurel wreaths and river gods. Turning to his advisors, he declares, "We will not abandon our city. Send engineers with timber and lime to buttress the spillway channel. Order farmers to open floodgates at the outskirts, channeling water toward marshlands. Let every hand labor by dawn's light." His command rings with resolve, yet behind his eyes flickers doubt. Water is patient. A dam's cracks widen slowly before tragedy strikes. At dawn's first pale glow, you join the throng of volunteers hauled from beds. Covered in coarse wool, you haul baskets of earth and sacks of lime toward breach points. Women bring loaves of barley bread and wine flasks. Children carry clay tokens for good luck, pressing them into freshly tamped embankments. The air fills with sweat and fervent prayers. Above, engineers direct efforts with measured calm, their Greek-trained precision battling nature's chaos. The dam's crest looms above you, a ridge of shifting soil. In places, steel rods protrude like wounded spines, and wooden shoring braces sag under the weight of mud. Each tremor prompts a rush to patch leaks, retamp earth, and pour fresh mortar. A heavy rope line guides workers to safety, but fear paces the crowd like an invisible overseer. When a particularly fierce quake strikes, sending a cascade of pebbles down the drop face, you drift on the smooth surface of the new lake, oars cutting through glassy water that once surged through Seuthopolis's bustling streets. Each gentle stroke sends ripples flickering across marble capitals now hidden beneath 40 feet of silt, as though the city lies sleeping in a silent cradle of water and mud. A pair of dragonflies schemes the surface, their iridescent wings catching the sun, while below, faint outlines of column drums and temple steps beckon like drowned fingers reaching for air. As you settle back, the bow of your skiff drifts above what was once the heart of the agora. Beneath your feet, layers of sediment have woven themselves gradually into a tapestry of preservation and decay. Seuthopolis's stone pavements, their alternating bands of white marble and gray limestone, make an eerie checkerboard pattern just visible through the turbid green, a reminder that this metropolis did not vanish without a trace. Mainstream archaeological surveys confirm that these submerged pavements remain remarkably intact, shielded from looters and weather by their aqueous burial. Peering over the gunwale, you spot the faint silhouette of a Doric column base, its fluted sides softened by centuries of silt abrasion. The once proud temple of Bendis now lies low, its peristyle a ghostly ring on the lakebed. Fish dart in and out of collapsed capitals, as though patrolling silent aisles, while clusters of zebra mussels cling to exposed stone. Unusual invaders who spread in freshwater bodies is controversial among ecologists. Some researchers argue these mussels arrived only in the 20th century, skewing modern assessments of the lake's ancient ecosystem. Historians and environmental scientists are still debating how much these invasive species have altered the preservation of sunken ruins. You lean forward, letting your fingertips hover just above the water, feeling the gentle pull of currents shaped by submerged walls and hidden chambers. Catalpa leaves drift past, a few landing on the lake's sheen. Tiny boats on an inland sea. Beneath the surface, you imagine sediment settling in concentric layers, each storm adding a fresh blanket that muffles echoing footfalls and merchant cries. Surprisingly, researchers found in modern core samples traces of organic remains, wooden beams from collapsed roofs, indicating that timber structures survived initial inundation far longer than previously thought. This rare organic preservation challenges earlier beliefs that only stone could endure in such watery graves. As your boat swings lazily, you engage with the grim beauty of stone staircases leading nowhere, their treads encrusted with soft algae. Each step once welcomed priests and pilgrims ascending for moonlit rites. Now they lie deserted, a submerged cathedral of green. The transformation from bustling pancake of urban life to silent amphitheater beneath the waves evokes a gentle melancholy, a lullaby for cities lost. Local fishermen sometimes claim they've heard phantom flute notes carried upward through the water, a charming fantasy perhaps born from wind over reed beds. Yet it underscores the power of Seuthopolis's memory to surface in unexpected ways. Drifting further, you pass the outline of the city's western gate, its twin bastions reduced to sinuous mounds of rubble. The massive drawbridge slots now form natural fish tubes where perch and carp school. In summer, water levels drop slightly, revealing the tops of masonry just enough for daring swimmers to clamber up and stand on silent archways. A handful of citizens partake in this rite each season, a quirky devotion that reflects a local belief. Standing atop the drowned gate at dawn brings good luck, one of many obscure traditions born of the city's sunken fate. Circling toward the eastern harbor, you imagine barges once disembarking amphorae of olive oil and wine onto stone wharves, now reduced to submerged wooden piles. Underwater surveys used remote-operated vehicles to map these pilings, revealing surprisingly well-preserved sections of fostered oak, coated in silt and protected from oxygen. These documented timbers provide invaluable insight into Thracian joinery techniques, long lost when city fires consumed above-water workshops. Scholars are still debating whether the oak came from local groves or was imported from farther west, a question with implications for understanding Odrysian trade networks. Above you, gulls wheel in lazy circles, their cries echoing off water where cobblestones lie hidden. The lake's surface glitters like a million scattered gems reflecting the sun's glare. You pause to close your eyes, letting the quiet lull you into reverie. In this submerged silence, the clamor of markets and the clang of hammers feel a world away, yet their echoes remain inscribed in the stones beneath, not lost, but waiting. Turning the bow toward the southern temple quarter, you recall ancient accounts of processions winding from riverbank to shrine, torches flickering beneath towering columns. Now, drone footage shows these columns as stumps emerging from the floor of the reservoir, ghostly sentinels marking where worship once thrived. Modern diving teams discovered that algae growth patterns on column shafts correspond with historic flood levels, offering a natural gauge of hydrological changes over centuries. This serendipitous algal record has become a new tool for environmental reconstructions, though some experts caution its accuracy depends on variables still poorly understood. Historians are still debating the reliability of biological proxies for dating submerged ruins. You angle the boat toward a faint rise in the lakebed stamped with concentric terraces, remnants of the city's citadel island at high water. Under low-level diving lights, this raised platform looks like a sunken amphitheater, stage for rituals and gatherings long muted by silt. A team of underwater archaeologists reported uncovering nearly complete ceramic vessels here, preserved in situ by anaerobic mud. This preservation of organic potting clay, not just the fired shells, offers a glimpse into the daily lives of Seuthopolis's inhabitants. Their cooking pots, water jugs, and storage amphorae. Such finds contradict earlier assumptions that only monumental architecture survived underwater. They reveal a submerged pantry of human history. Suddenly, a breeze lifts your hair as you drift past where the southern gate once stood, the archway now completely submerged. A lone swan glides past your bow, preening itself upon tranquil waters. The contrast of graceful life against silent stone evokes a paradox. Nature reclaims human endeavor, yet in doing so, preserves it in crystalline calm. Some conservationists argue that leaving the site underwater ensures its long-term protection, while others advocate for partial draining to expose key structures. This debate balances the risks of silt removal against the benefits of public engagement. Historians are still debating how best to honor both preservation and accessibility. Leaning back, you note the gentle hiss of water lapping against the boat's hull. It's a soothing metronome marking the passage of time. The city's submerged heart pulses slowly now, but it still beats beneath the weight of history. You imagine future generations donning scuba gear to explore these silent streets, tracing the outlines of colonnades and temples under the ghostly glow of underwater lamps. Already, 3D mapping projects have begun digitally reconstructing Seuthopolis's monuments, though purists lament that virtual models can never fully convey the tactile resonance of standing on ancient stone. Scholars are still debating the role of digital archaeology in preserving submerged sites. As dusk approaches, you guide the skiff toward a small inlet where the original drainage channels lie buried. These channels, once designed to protect the city from floods, now serve as natural sediment traps. Silt accumulates in rhythmic lines here, visible even from a low-flying drone, like the growth rings of a tree documenting each high-water event. Modern hydrologists use this sediment layering to calibrate environmental models, a surprising offshoot of cultural heritage studies. Yet interpretations vary. Some argue these layers obscure older events. Others see them as precise archives. Historians are still debating the sedimentary record's completeness. Ahead, a narrow peninsula offers a vantage point over the entire citybed. You beach your boat on a silty shoal and step onto a patch of rock just above waterline. Here, pale marble chippings glisten like crushed pearls. Kneeling, you scoop a handful of mud, feeling its cool softness. The lake feels deeper just beyond, but beneath this surface lies the story of a city's rise and fall. In your palm, the silt feels alive with memory, each grain a fragment of Seuthopolis's vanished bustle. Rising, you take a final look at the submerged silence spread before you. Temples, gates, walls, and dwellings now unified in quiet repose. The wind carries a distant croak of frogs hidden among reeds, an aquatic chorus greeting the encroaching twilight. As the sun dips behind hills, the lake's surface turns molten gold, transforming mud-laden ruins into a mirror of the sky. Tonight, you leave the lake's edge with water still dripping from your boots and a deep serenity in your chest. Seuthopolis sleeps beneath the silt, its marble bones cradled by mud and water. In that submerged silence, you hear not absence but enduring presence. A hush settles across the rolling fields where no cobbled road dares to cross, only tall grasses whispering ancient secrets in the breeze. Sunlight glints on scattered fragments of pottery half buried in the soil, fine Thracian painted wares, their once vibrant reds and blacks now faded to earthen whispers. The very ground seems to hold its breath as you step among tufts of wild fennel and shepherd's purse, each footfall stirring up ghostly memories of marble columns and bustling markets long consumed by mud and time. Venturing deeper into the overgrowth, you notice how shards of wheel-thrown bowls and amphora handles peek through the grass like broken teeth in a weathered jaw. Here, a fragment painted with a griffin motif. There, a rim inscribed with an early Thracian cursive script that scholars believe denoted local clay workshops. Commonly, Odrysian pottery is dated to the late 4th century BCE, marking the city's heyday under Seuthes III, and these shards bear the telltale dentings and burn marks of hearth-fired kills. An odd tile stamped with an Etruscan potter's badge hints at trade links extending westward, an obscure trade tidbit that surprises even seasoned archaeologists. Some maintain these foreign imports reached Seuthopolis via Macedonian intermediaries. Others propose direct exchanges across the Adriatic, a matter still hotly disputed among historians. As you squat to examine a polished fragment, a sudden breeze carries the faint clink of metal, a farmer's plow striking hidden stone. In these parts, locals long ago incorporated broken pottery into lime mortar, the angular bits acting as primitive aggregate to strengthen their field walls. Rumor has it that some villagers still hoard shards for this purpose, believing the old city's strength will lend resilience to their own cottages. This practice goes unmentioned in classical texts but appears in a scattered parish register from the 11th century. A single entry noting that Risto built his barn with a mixture of lime and city fragments. Whether such fragments actually reinforced medieval mortar or simply amused masons remains one of archaeology's quirkier debates. Between knolls crowned with hawthorns, you discover an eroded stela carved with a lone eye motif, half hidden by moss and lichen. The symbol, resembling the watching god glyphs of Thracian cultic art, survives here alone, its counterpart long vanished. Some scholars argue that the thieves of the 14th century sought out and looted identical markers, believing them talismanic. Others contend the stela was a medieval novelty, carved by a hermit monk sheltering among ruins, merging Christian symbolism with local superstition. Historians are still debating the origins of this solitary monument. Pressing on, you reach a shallow depression ringed by crumbling stone blocks, perhaps the base of a small shrine or public well. Broken incense burners lie strewn about, each bearing traces of pine resin and myrrh imported from the south, a luxury once reserved for royal courts. An inscription scratched on the base, now nearly illegible, reads, "For thy power, O Zalmoxis," suggesting that cult worship lingered centuries past the city's political demise. Yet Byzantine hagiographies make no reference to continued pagan rites here, creating a tension between material finds and textual silence. Scholars are still debating whether folk beliefs survived in secret long after official suppression. Sunlight slants through ash trees as you wander into a glade dotted with shallow pits, remnants of medieval diggers hunting for rumored hidden treasures. Local legend held that when the Ottoman armies marched north in the 14th century, Thracian gold was buried beneath temple stones. The pits vary in size, some scarcely deeper than a boot heel, others plunging into the foul-smelling bog below. Over time, many collapsed, their spoil heaps now reclaimed by nettles and thistles. Modern surveys detect magnetic anomalies here, but whether they mark buried metal hoards or simply natural mineral veins is unknown, and fiercely debated among geophysicists and historians alike. Following a narrow deer trail, you come upon a circle of carved curbstones, perhaps the remains of a circular altar platform. These stones bear interlaced snake motifs, surprisingly similar to Scythian animal-style reliefs found on belt buckles in the steppe. An obscure thesis published by a Bulgarian scholar in 1974 suggested mercenary cavalry from the north might have settled here after Seuthes' fall, bringing their iconography with them. Critics dismiss this as overreaching speculation, citing the absence of corroborating burial finds. Historians are still debating whether this serpentine art is truly steppe-derived or a local innovation reflecting universal chthonic symbols. A sudden rustle alerts you to a lone goat tethered nearby, munching on brambles with placid contentment. Goatherds once favored these grassy knolls, calling them the lost city high pastures. Seasonal movements brought flocks here each spring. Shepherds built crude stone shelters from fallen blocks, repurposing temple rubble as windbreaks. One fragmentary shepherd's hut survives in a sketch by an 18th century traveler, whose diaries, recently rediscovered in a private collection, describe pillars strewn like driftwood and mosaics of pottery stars, glinting in the dawn light. Whether his descriptions reflect fleeting low-water glimpses or poetic license remains in dispute. Continuing through the overgrowth, you notice clusters of quartz pebbles arranged deliberately around a mossy stone foundation. Folklore claims these quartz paths guided souls on moonless nights to the underworld, a leftover ritual from pre-Christian times. A rare fragment of a necromantic text, discovered in a nearby monastery's library, warns novices not to disturb these pathways or risk invoking restless spirits. Many modern scholars view these superstitions as products of medieval monastic imagination rather than authentic Thracian practice, fueling an ongoing debate over the authenticity of post-classical folklore. Around a gentle bend, the ruins give way to a broad meadow where the grass grows knee-high. Pottery shards sparkle in patches of exposed earth, rim fragments, handle loops, rim stamps naming local potters. A curious find, A small piece of fine Samian ware, that glossy red pottery prized in Greek symposiums, lying amid coarse cooking jars. How such an item reached Seuthopolis's margins remains a quizzical puzzle. Some scholars argue it arrived as a prized heirloom handed down through generations. Others suspect looters or collectors of a later era dropped it here. The truth remains buried, alongside broken crockery, in these grassy fields. Pausing at a lone marble capital half swallowed by sedge, you reflect on the site of fallen grandeur. Once, these capitals crowned towering temple columns. Now, they serve as perches for larkspurs and wild daisies. Their carved volutes, softened by centuries of weathering, speak of craftsmanship and optimism now dimmed by time. Mainstream historians note that such capitals often survive long after walls crumble, their durable forms serving as silent markers of lost civilizations. Yet whether this capital came from the Temple of Bendis or a smaller shrine remains uncertain, an ambiguity that frames much of Seuthopolis's archaeology. As afternoon light warms the meadow, you lie back against a cool stone block and gaze up at drifting clouds. The fields fall quiet save for the drone of a distant cicada, a natural chorus that blends with imagined echoes of market cries and distant hymns. In this moment, the city's pulse flickers faintly beneath your skin, a reminder that even forgotten stones retain the memory of laughter and lament. Echoes of Seuthopolis's daily rhythms seem to surface in the wind, carrying whispers of artisans at work and priests extolling Zalmoxis under moonlight. Rising, you follow a barely visible track toward a low hillock marking what medieval maps called the King's Mound. Locals believed a buried monarch reposed here, his treasures entombed alongside him. A shallow excavation in the 19th century revealed nothing but charcoal-stained earth and a scattering of nail fragments, perhaps from wooden coffins long perished. Some archaeologists posit that perishable materials like wooden sarcophagi were recycled by medieval villagers for firewood, erasing direct evidence of royal burials. Others maintain that the mound was never a burial site at all, merely a natural knoll misinterpreted by mapmakers. Historians are still debating this question. Emerging from the grasses, you cross a ruined causeway once leading to the city's eastern gate. Here, fragments of dressed stone pavement, alternating white marble and dark limestone, glimmer like a celestial path. The causeway's edges, hewn smooth by ancient feet, still bear faint chisel marks. By the late Middle Ages, travelers bypassed this route in favor of sandy trails. Only a handful of intrepid pilgrims reported glimpsing the Road of Stars before it vanished under new plow lines. Such accounts survive only in marginal annotations of travelers' journals, their accuracy questioned by modern editors. A solitary hawk circles overhead, its shadow flickering across the battlefield of ruins. In these fields once lay the city's mirrored canals, tombs, and shrines. Now only shards and stones endure. You pick up. Morning light illuminates the drained reservoir bed, where a network of marble pavements and stone foundations emerges from the mud like the ribs of an ancient leviathan. Engineers stand knee-deep in thick silt as they inspect the grid of streets once hidden beneath 40 feet of water. A hush settles across the site as heavy wooden gates click shut behind the final trickles of the spring flood. Stone floors laid in checkerboard patterns of white marble and dark limestone now glow in the dawn glow. An entire urban plan reveals itself across several hectares of exposed lakebed. Old cart trails and grazing fields vanish under this newly unveiled metropolis. That moment arrived in the spring of 1953, when Dimitar Petrov led a survey team to confirm the dam's stability. A routine soil test turned into a scene of astonishment when the survey rod struck solid stone instead of soft mud. Columns, drums, and fluted basses lay scattered across a once-concealed plaza. Pottery shards and bronze fragments peeked between paving stones. Local shepherds had whispered of submerged stones, but no official account had given credence to rural gossip until that day of revelation. Word spread swiftly through nearby villages that the city of Seuthopolis had risen from its watery tomb. Civil engineers, archaeologists, geologists, and draftspersons soon formed a joint task force. Timber scaffolding climbed above excavation trenches submerged just days earlier. Carbide lamps and handheld searchlights revealed column capitals encrusted in algae and silt. Workers dabbed sponge brushes across battered reliefs to reveal carved details. Rustic photographs captured the first divers wading through knee-high water, cradling blocks of marble against their chests as they emerged from half-submerged corridors. These images circulated in academic journals and state newspapers alike as symbols of national heritage reborn beneath Cold War skies. Excavation trenches uncovered private homes as well as public edifices. Mud brick walls had collapsed in neat piles, leaving floor mosaics intact. A geometric pattern of interwoven olive branches and pomegranates lay protected under a fallen wooden lintel. Hearthstones stained with centuries of charcoal still bore traces of fish bones and crushed grains. Fragments of painted plaster clung to rubble in sheltered niches. Each artifact provided a snapshot of domestic life long forgotten beneath currents and sediment. An inscription scratched into a mosaic tile bore a homeowner's name in faded Greek letters. Scholars debated whether wealthy merchants or temple officials had commissioned such artistry in lavish domestic quarters. Mapping efforts revealed a perfect grid aligned to cardinal directions. Geologists extracted core samples along straight trenches to analyze sediment layers. Each horizon corresponded to flood events documented in ancient chronicles and medieval records. The stratigraphy yielded data on ancient climate patterns and river behavior. Debate arose over whether modern damming had altered natural deposition or whether the siltry record offered a faithful archive. Hydrologists and archaeologists convened symposia to weigh evidence of past storms and human interventions. Local farmers initially welcomed exposure of buried stones for souvenir hunting. Soon complaints surfaced that sticky clay clogged plows and delayed spring planting. Municipal authorities faced petitions demanding restoration of normal water levels. A tense council meeting ended in compromise. A defined excavation season followed by prompt reflooding. Engineers feared loss of archaeological access while agronomists feared crop failure. The agreement demonstrated recurring tensions between infrastructure needs and preservation of cultural patrimony. Within the drained basin, teams uncovered ritual vessels, tools, coins, and everyday wares. Bronze mirrors still showed ornate handles in floral designs. Loom weights shaped like miniature horses hinted at vibrant textile production. A bronze lamella inscribed with a prayer to the earth god ignited debates on the longevity of Thracian cult practices. Some experts dated the lamella to the Hellenistic era, while others argued for a Roman period origin. Epigraphers compared letter forms to those on coins minted in Seuthopolis to refine the chronology. Beginning in the 1960s, remote-operated vehicles explored submerged precincts beyond safe diving limits. Ghostly black and white footage revealed colonnaded walkways and temple steps buried under a thin veneer of silt. Proponents hailed the technology as vital for non-intrusive survey. Critics warned that reliance on cameras alone risked misinterpreting contexts without hands-on excavation. Academic journals carried heated discussions on balancing technological advances with traditional archaeological methods. A temporary research center established in a converted grain silo served as laboratory and archive. Card catalogs listed tens of thousands of sherds and metal finds. Exhibit boards displayed site plans and photographs. Conservators soaked pottery fragments in distilled water to remove centuries of mineral incrustation. Weekly bulletins documented trench progress for international colleagues. French researchers praised parallels to Hellenistic city plans. Soviet specialists emphasized the demonstration of Thracian self-rule. British numismatists studied coin hoards recovered from silted drains. Each contribution reflected broader political alignments of the era. Field methods evolved into sectional refilling techniques. Excavation trenches were backfilled with clean silt after documentation to protect underlying layers. This method influenced later guidelines for managing submerged sites. Yet some conservators noted that repeated wetting and drying accelerated salt crystallization in exposed stone. Discussions of whether to maintain access or ensure long-term conservation persisted in specialist circles. Digital technology transformed public engagement at the turn of the millennium. Virtual reality recreations allowed visitors to walk sunlit marble streets beneath simulated skies. Critics contended that virtual tours overshadowed the necessity of fieldwork to generate new data. Funding agencies sometimes prioritized engaging exhibits over laborious excavations. Scholars advocated for hybrid models that used digital visualization alongside targeted in situ investigation. Seasonal drops in reservoir levels continue to reveal sections of colonnades and gates. Kayakers and snorkelers share images online of arches and stones just beneath the surface. Photographs of half-submerged columns sometimes attract throngs to the water's edge each summer. Conservationists worry that unsupervised visits can damage fragile remains. Debates over public access versus preservation remain as acute as during the early years of rediscovery. As twilight falls over the reservoir rim, ripples lap against emergent pavements bearing the weight of modern boots. Drone surveys capture high-resolution images of submerged patterns. In a candlelit library lined with scrolls and site reports, the clatter of quills meets muffled conversation as scholars pore over plans of Seuthopolis. Excavation maps reveal a precise grid aligned to the cardinal points, an echo of Hellenistic urban design adopted in Thrace during the late 4th century BCE. Records from classical geographers describe Seuthopolis as both a political center and a sacred precinct, suggesting a dual civic and religious function. Among the parchments lies a narrow bronze token inscribed with an obscure workshop mark, its purpose unknown but likely belonging to a minor cult. Mainstream academics credit the token to initiatory use in temple ceremonies, yet others argue it may have been a seed counter for agricultural offerings. Scholars are still debating this question. Along a long table, fragments of column drums and capitals lie catalogued under handwritten tags. The Doric-style columns, imported from quarries near Paros, demonstrate Seuthes III's ambition to rival Greek sanctuaries. Local sandstone used in secondary construction speaks to a pragmatic adaptation of imported aesthetics to Thracian materials. A seldom-cited mason's ledger, recently translated, notes slight variations in column diameters, perhaps reflecting on-site adjustments rather than workshop errors. This ledger also records payments for an assistant who misread the pattern, implying quality control procedures rarely documented elsewhere. Historians are still debating the extent to which these adjustments represent intentional hybridization or simple oversight. Beneath a flickering oil lamp, linguists examine trilingual inscriptions on limestone stele, Thracian hieroglyphics, Koine Greek dedicatory formulas, and sporadic Old Persian names. These public proclamations confirm diplomatic ties to Achaemenid satrapies, while private graffiti in the same precinct include hastily scratched personal names and illiterate doodles. One shot glass-sized inscription reads Aranos, alongside a crudely drawn ship, a paradoxical mix of Greek nomenclature and seafaring motifs. Some philologists interpret Aranos as a guest list for a socio-political banquet. Others suggest it signifies a merchant's brand. Scholars are still debating this question. In hushed corridors, plans of the Temple of Bendis and smaller shrines to Zalmoxis sit side by side. Archaeological reports confirm the primary sanctuary boasted a circular cella with a vaulted oculus, while peripheral chapels feature rectangular layouts. A single mention in a Byzantine lectionary refers to 7 lamps dancing at the moon goddess's feast, an account otherwise lacking archaeological corroboration. That text implies a nocturnal ritual involving oil lamps set to drift on water, a practice archaeologists struggle to link to material remains. Historians are still debating whether such nocturnal ceremonies took place or if they are later legendary embellishments. Drafts of hydraulic surveys lie spread across a marble bench, detailing the dam's embankment dimensions and spillway channels. Opus Cretaceum walls on the floodplain employed alternating layers of rammed earth and lime mortar, innovations borrowed from Greek engineers at Pella. A footnote in one Roman account describes Thracian dam failures under winter frost, yet core samples extracted in the 1960s reveal frost-resistant clay mixes. Some engineers credit local kiln experiments with adding crushed ceramics to mortar, enhancing freeze-thaw resilience. Others contend these mixes were ad hoc repairs after cracks appeared. Scholars are still debating this question. In a back room, numismatists compare coins struck under Seuthes III's authority to later Roman issues minted on the site. The earlier coinage features the king's laureate profile on one side and a rearing horse on the other, a nod to Thracian cavalry prestige. Rare denominations, including a half-obol marked with a small boar head, appear only in a handful of hoards. Some researchers attribute the boarhead issue to a festival token repurposed as currency in emergencies. Opponents argue it reflects an experimental currency reform intended to stimulate local trade. Historians are still debating this question. Near a battered map pinned to the wall, domestic pottery fragments illustrate everyday life. Amphora sherds bear charcoal remnants from hearth cooking, while oil lamps show soot patterns consistent with pine resin incense. A particularly odd find is the sewn jar, its cracks mended with copper wire, a technique scarce in classical contexts. Textual parallels exist in a Cretan treatise on masonry, suggesting itinerant craftsmen may have introduced such repairs to Thrace. However, some critics dismiss the wires as medieval salvage rather than original fixes. Scholars are still debating this question. Under a glass case, the absence of lavish grave goods in the necropolis challenges expectations of Thracian elite burials. Archaeologists uncovered unadorned stone cists and simple incised markers, save for a single bronze mirror found in a child's tomb. That mirror, edged in embossed floral patterns, stands out as an anomaly. Interpretations diverge. One camp views the child's mirror as a familial heirloom tragically lost by adults. Another suggests it was a deliberate offering to accompany youth in the afterlife. Historians are still debating this question. Stacked drawings depict bronze relief panels recovered from rubble, warrior processions, sacrificial bulls, and a unique depiction of a four-horse chariot crowned by a crescent moon. The chariot relief, absent from mainland workshops, hints at a Thracian innovation blending equestrian imagery with lunar symbolism. Connoisseurs of Hellenistic art argue that its stylistic details, slender legs, driver's tunic folds, place its manufacture in a local workshop rather than a Greek import. Dissenters point to shared motifs across the Black Sea region as evidence of broader cross-cultural exchange. Scholars are still debating this question. Plans of the agora show a large open plaza surrounded by colonnaded stoa and smaller administrative buildings. One drawing marks a rectangular pit once thought to be a water reservoir but later reinterpreted as a public latrine, an ironic revision that challenges early reports. Archaeological layers contain ceramic tiles with painted graffiti, games, insults, erotic sketches, remnants of unguarded social spaces. Some academics hail this as the first documented public restroom in Thrace. Others question whether the pit's drainage profile supports such usage. Scholars are still debating this question. A series of cross-section diagrams illustrates the city's final moments before submersion. Sediment cores show a rapid influx of silt, consistent with a sudden dam collapse rather than gradual abandonment. Yet surface wear on column shafts suggests exposure to both flooding and foot traffic after initial inundation, evidence of intermittent reoccupation or ritual visits. Some scholars view this as proof of repeated pilgrimages to submerged temples. Skeptics interpret abrasion as natural water currents against unprotected stone. Scholars are still debating this question. In a seminar room, recent remote sensing data overlays LiDAR scans on archaeological maps, revealing faint outlines of roads and terraces. The precision of drone photography contrasts with earlier diver-driven surveys. Conservationists endorse advanced techniques to minimize disturbance, while traditionalists worry reliance on technology diminishes the value of tactile discovery. Institutional inertia and funding priorities often determine which methods prevail, leaving the debate over best practices in limbo. Scholars are still debating this question. A small alcove displays broken fragments of wooden beams from the submerged citadel island. Dendrochronological analysis dates the beams to spring of 310 BCE, shortly after Seuthes' death. That precise dating raises questions. Was the citadel's abandonment planned following the king's passing, or did it result from posthumous political shifts? Contemporary accounts speak of dynastic turmoil but remain vague on timelines. Some historians argue for a coordinated evacuation to protect elite families. Others suggest chaotic retreat amid competing factions. Scholars are still debating this question. Lecture posters advertise public forums on the ethics of draining portions of the reservoir for excavation. Heritage managers advocate controlled exposure to document new areas. Environmentalists warn of ecological damage and long-term harm to silt-encased structures. Community groups dispute whether local farmers should retain water access for irrigation. The tension between scientific inquiry and stakeholder interests reflects ongoing challenges in heritage governance. Scholars are still debating this question. Standing before a cluster of site directors and graduate students, a veteran archaeologist recaps 70 years of research. Seuthes' vision, Hellenistic engineering, Thracian beliefs, Roman repurposing, medieval folk memories, and modern rediscovery. Each phase adds layers to the city's narrative, but also spawns fresh controversies. As dusk settles over the reservoir rim, voices merge in cautious agreement that Seuthopolis' story will never be final. The city's stones, submerged and re-emerged, continue to spark debate, inviting each new generation to question, reassess, and listen closely to the whispers of the past. Soft light filters through clouded skies,